This is an ABC News election update. Now reporting, George Stephanopoulos.
Good evening. We are taking a quick break from world news and our other programs because millions of you are voting all across the country today. And our election team here tracking all the results in a national campaign with so much at stake. Control of Congress, governor seats, and state houses, all setting the stage for the final 2 years of the Obama presidency. Biggest question right now, who will take the Senate? And the key number is 6. That's how many seats Republicans need to get it back. The map here shows the 16 battlegrounds we're watching most closely tonight. It also shows what Democrats are up against. They're defending 13 of those seats, Republicans only 3. Polls have now closed in 3 of those key states. Here they are, and we already have a winner. That's in the state of Kentucky, where the Republican leader Mitch McConnell has defeated Allison Lundergan Grimes, the Democrat. McConnell returning for his 6th term in the Senate. He first came to Washington 50 years ago as a Senate intern. Of course, he's hoping when all the votes are counted, he will be the majority leader of the Senate. In Georgia, Michelle Nunn, the Democrat, daughter of a former senator, facing David Perdue, businessman, the former CEO of Dollar General and Reebok. His business record has been an issue in this race. And remember a fact about this race, if neither one gets 50%, then that will have a runoff in January 6th. And in Virginia, Democrat Mark Warner facing Republican Ed Gillespie, the former chair of the Republican National Committee. Warner pretty comfortable through most of this race, but Gillespie is putting up a fight. President Obama won that state. We're also learning a lot more about what's on voters' minds from our exit polls. World News Tonight, anchor David Muir here with that. And David, Americans in a sour mood tonight.
Yeah, you and I have been talking about this, George, for some time now, but look at the direction of the country. When we ask, are we on the right track or the wrong track? An overwhelming number, 65% saying this country's on the wrong track. And out of Kentucky, George, 88% of those polled said control of the Senate was important to them, which is why they went for McConnell.
That is a big part of the vote. We're going to be here all night long, 7 hours of breaking coverage. Stay with us.
Hey, good evening. I'm Dan Harris, and welcome to a special and unprecedented ABC News live stream. For the next 7 hours, we'll bring you all the breaking news, the latest results, the latest analysis, and for the first time in our history, we are combining our digital and our broadcast coverage, so you will see all of it here live tonight. ABC News chief anchor George Stephanopoulos will be leading our coverage tonight. I'll be switching off with him occasionally as the evening progresses. As George just told you, we do have a projected winner in the big Senate race in Kentucky tonight, Mitch McConnell. But we do also have some results in some two other Senate races tonight. There's one of them. ABC News is projecting that Lindsey Graham, the incumbent in South Carolina, will hold on to his seat. And in a special Senate race in South Carolina, ABC News is projecting that Tim Scott will emerge victorious. So 2 Republican victories in South Carolina in the Senate race there. No big surprise, but we wanted to bring you the latest news. Now, we should say, while all eyes are on the Senate tonight, there are 36 governorships up for grabs tonight. At this point in America, there are 21 Democratic governors and 29 Republican governors. As this evening progresses, this picture here could very well change. And in fact, we do have some results in the governor's races tonight. ABC News is projecting that Nikki Haley, the incumbent Republican in South Carolina, will hold on to her seat. There is another huge governor's race down south tonight. We do not have enough information to project a winner in the governor's race in Georgia. That is where Jason Carter is running against Nathan Deal. Jason Carter, it is worth noting, is the grandson of Jimmy Carter. Let's bring in now ABC's Cokie Roberts, who's joining us from our Washington bureau. Cokie, with us?
Yes, Dan. Very interesting night all the way around.
So let's talk about the biggest headline to emerge thus far, which is Mitch McConnell. Surprise or not a surprise? I mean, Allison Lundergan Grimes, the Democrat, ran a pretty good campaign.
She ran a very good campaign, and she had the whole world come in to support her. President Clinton, Mrs. Clinton, every Democrat who anybody in Kentucky happens to like. And so she thought for a while that she was doing well. McConnell always, though, Dan, starts off poorly and then picks up toward the end. And what was so interesting was that he, of course, if the Republicans do take the Senate, he will become the majority leader. And 63% of the people told the exit pollsters that that was very important to them, that it was that control of the Senate was very important in terms of their vote. Now, that's somewhat arcane. It's not something that affects you personally. But in Kentucky, people understood it, and they went for McConnell.
I want to get into the exit polls in a moment, but let me ask you about the results out of South Carolina tonight. Not surprising to have 3 Republicans emerging victorious, according to ABC News projections. It is surprising, however, when you talk about the ethnic backgrounds of the winners tonight.
Absolutely. Tim Scott was appointed to the Senate, but now he has been elected to the Senate, an African-American elected to the Senate in South Carolina. Nikki Haley, the governor, re-elected, an Indian-American elected to the governorship in South Carolina. This is a big change in the American South. And this is something that, as the country has gotten less white, has been remarked in a lot of parts of the country, but it is true in the South as well as other places. And South Carolina is certainly showing it tonight.
Let's talk about the exit polls now. The anger emanating out of these cold numbers is palpable. And as you and I were discussing before we went on the air, people are not only upset with President Obama and the economy, but they're also not expressing a lot of love for the Republicans.
No, they don't like either party very much, and they're clearly saying that. And in the national, when you sort of look at every state together and try to pull together some national numbers, the support for the president was very small, and the number of people who say that they voted to support the president was about 20%. About 33% said they were opposing the president. The rest said he wasn't a factor, although sometimes that's, it's a factor that you're not quite aware that you're voting on when you go in to vote. But the Republican Party has also not seen very positively. Only 41% say they approve versus 55% who say they disapprove. And Republican leaders, 38% say they approve. 44% say they approve of the president. So it's not that the Republicans are getting a ringing endorsement tonight, but the upset over the economy remains very, very high. Concern about terrorism is high, and the president's handling of all of it is low.
It struck me, looking at the numbers, that people are not only angry, but they are, as our chief political editor here has described, angsty as well. They're not only angry, but they're worried about their future.
They are. When you ask them if you think things are going to get better over the next few years, the answer is a resounding no. And again, when you have this fear of terrorism out there, that's angsty, certainly. And the people who say that they think that their own economic situation has gotten better, even though we know that the big economic numbers are better, that number is very small. Most people actually say, the plurality say they think their economic situation has stayed about the same.
Right, that's such a key dynamic in American politics right now, the difference between the numbers at the top looking good, the unemployment numbers going down, the Dow going up, but people out there in Main Street not feeling it. ABC's Cokie Roberts will be coming back to you repeatedly throughout this evening. I will try to make up more words like angsty as we continue to move through the evening. Appreciate that, Cokie.
Always good.
Let's bring in now from Fusion, our sister network, Alicia Menendez. Good evening. How are you?
Good evening. Great to see you. Can you believe they called Kentucky this early?
I'm a little surprised. Were you surprised by that?
I thought we were going to be looking at it later into the evening, and I think over the course of the next few days, you're going to see analysts trying to figure out what happened. Social media can offer us a few cues. Tonight, you and I are going to be talking about Twitter, Facebook, which is great to see what people are talking about. But right now, I want to look at some Google search terms, because that tells us what people are asking questions about, unfiltered, right? These are the things you're afraid to ask your coworkers or your neighbors.
Right. I hope nobody ever sees my Google searches under any circumstances.
All right, so here are the top things from the last 7 days that have been Googled search engine terms associated with Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell net worth, voting record, wife, and how old is Mitch McConnell?
How old is Mitch McConnell, do you know?
You'll have to take to Google to find that out. But here's what I found interesting. If you look at the search terms for Alison Lundergan Grimes, they're almost virtually the same. They want to know about her husband. They want to know how old she is. She's 35. Her race wasn't. I mean, her age was an issue in this race.
This was the biggest divide between the age difference of all the races this year.
And our producers who have access to Google are telling us that McConnell's 72.
Sorry,
so now
I hate asking
the more
people
you know.
questions when they...
And then net worth. And then finally, the state parking spot location, which had become sort of this controversy over the course of the campaign. What I found interesting about this is people talk about the issues, voters care about the issues, but they also care about the candidates who they're voting for. And if you look at all of these search terms, that's what they're about.
Alicia, you'll be bringing us the latest from social throughout the night and much more, including a focus on millennials as well.
Yep.
Thank you. We'll be back to you many more times. Let's go to the White House now, and ABC's Jim Avila is there. Jim, are the president and his team, are they prepared for a beatdown tonight?
Well, the White House is not yet ready to submit or to admit that there might be a real problem tonight. They're saying that as long as the polls are still open, that they will continue to hold out and believe that they still have a chance at holding on to the Senate. So, no, they're not conceding at this point, Dan.
Are they planning at all how the next 2 years may go under a theoretical Republican-controlled Senate?
Yes, we have got some insight into that. We've asked about what the president is going to do if indeed he is faced with a Republican Senate. We're told by White House officials that the president plans on continuing his agenda, that he plans on using some executive actions. In fact, they're firm in their belief that they will continue to do this executive action on immigration, no matter how opposed the Republican Senate might be for that the president plans by the end of the year, probably not before his trip at the end of this week to Asia, but by the end of the year to, in fact, extend some of the immigration policies that would allow those who are working here illegally to stay in this country.
And so they don't worry that doing that over the objections of a potential Republican-controlled Senate would spoil any chances for cooperation in the final 2 years of this presidency?
Well, they don't think that they really believe that the moment has passed for cooperation, that the Republicans had lots of chances to, at least on the issue of immigration, to compromise. And they didn't do that then, and certainly there's not much more of an indication that they'll compromise once they're in control of the Senate. There's been no indication from the House at all that they're going to compromise with the president on immigration. So the White House believes that the only way that immigration reform that the president has been promising now for 6 years will be done is if he does it alone.
And Jim, I'm just curious whether you think we'll see any staff changes as a result of what happens tonight, or just as a result of the fact that this administration is now 6 years old. There has been some reporting that the president might take the advice to widen his circle of advisors. What are you hearing on that score?
Well, I think there are always changes in the last 2 years of a president's term, and I think we will see some people leaving. They'll probably be leaving to private sector jobs, those type of things. So that wouldn't be a surprise. It's even been talked about there might be a change in the chief of staff, but I don't think it's a matter of widening the circle so much, because I think what you're going to see with this president is that he's going to try to do some things to get his legacy going, to leave some impression, historic impressions. He, of course, has had Obamacare, which has certainly changed the nation. That's one thing that's on his resume. I think you'll see him moving towards some immigration reform for his resume. You may even see some dramatic moves. One thing you might look for, Dan, is some kind of rapprochement with Cuba. Look out for that.
That's interesting. Let me just ask you about the potential for a beating that we've been discussing tonight. Do you think there will be some finger pointing within the White House directed at the president himself, who not too long ago got up and said exactly what Democrats across the country did not want him to say? He got up in an event and said that his policies, while his name isn't on the ballot, his policies are. Republicans across the country use that in ads to tie their Democratic opponents to an unpopular president. Was there any hard feelings within the White House, any regret over having uttered that line?
I don't think you're going to see that in the White House. I think you will see some finger pointing. There will be some Democrats who point to the president as being an anchor, holding down the Democrats in this election. That almost always happens, however, in an election, in a midterm election. The president rarely is able to transfer his popularity or unpopularity to his fellow Democrats or fellow Republicans. So I don't think there's going to be much controversy in between. What we did see today is the beginning of a talking point from the White House saying, look, it was the candidate's decision not to have us come out and campaign. not to have the president go from state to state and try to rally the troops, try to get out the Democratic vote, the base. That was their call. We let them make that call. But once the election is over, we're going to say to them in many cases, we told you so. You should have used the president. You should have used him to come out and campaign for you. I think you'll see some of that.
Jim Avila at the White House. And Jim, we will be coming back to you many times throughout this evening. We really appreciate your reporting this evening. Let's get it back to ABC's chief anchor, George Stephanopoulos. George, over to you.
Thank you, Dan. I want to pick up just where you left off with Jim, because I have John Carl here as well. You hear Jim reporting that the White House was sort of starting to lay the blame a little bit on the candidates already early in the night. It's one of the things we've seen all through this day, and maybe it's part of the character of Democrats, getting very pessimistic in these final hours before the polls closed.
They're certainly pessimistic and also laying the groundwork for, well, it could have been worse, given the environment. The president himself today in a radio interview said this is the worst midterm election map in terms of what Senate seats were up since Eisenhower in 1958. So clearly some of that. But, you know, I got to tell you, George, there was no internal debate among Democrats about whether or not the president should go out in these races. The White House wasn't pushing for this, but now that we're at this point, there is some of this talk. Well, maybe he should have gone out. And you know what? This will almost certainly be a better night for Democratic governors than in these Senate races.
That's because things are working against all incumbents right now. And David Muir, you have the exit poll that shows exactly why people just aren't happy.
Not just bad for the president and Democrats. Look at this. It's a trust issue. When we asked, do you trust the government to fix the problems of this country, 78% say sometimes or never. Just 20% actually trust the government. But here was something really interesting. I think John will probably find this interesting, that the Obama job performance across the nation, 55 disapproved. That's not surprising to you and me, George. We've been talking about this. But look at Kentucky. That number shoots up to 63%, certainly helping McConnell, even though he's not terribly popular in his own state.
And then let me bring that to Matthew Dowd, because we also saw Allison Lundergan-Grimes wouldn't admit that she voted for Obama. And you've been writing and saying that you think a lot of the candidates made a mistake by running so far away from the president.
Well, I think we've had a series of midterms that have been nationalized, and the opposition party always doesn't want it to be nationalized, but we're in a national environment, and the only way I think you win in a national environment is to have a national message. The Democrats decided to run this in a state-by-state way, and in a nationalized environment, the only national message voters heard was a negative one about the president, about the economy, and about the right track of the country.
David Plouffe, give us some insight on that. Of course, you're President Obama's former campaign manager, served as a senior advisor in the White House. Take us inside that White House debate over what the president should do, how active he should be, where he should be seen.
Well, I think you do have to take cue from the candidates. I mean, they're the ones on the ballot running the campaign. I will make the point that there's a lot of votes still to be counted, but you could have over 20% of the country tonight now be represented by Democratic governors. So I think, you know, the Republicans are going to have a good night in the Senate, probably in the House, too. But I think the governor's mansions, which are going to be very important politically, but also substantively. So there's just a lot of unease out there, I think, right now. Both parties are on probation, severely so.
A lot of unease out there. Americans still concerned about the economy, but Martha Raddatz, our chief global affairs correspondent, Americans concerned about the economy, but so much of the campaign dialogue in the final weeks about foreign crises. And of course, you know, and that ties into the whole competence issue for the president and his team.
It's not what he wanted to be talking about, but we did have foreign crises. We had ISIS, we had Ebola, we had Ukraine, we had Israel and Gaza all summer long, all year long. So that's what everyone was talking about. That's what the president had to deal with, and that's what critics seized on.
And we've already had that win in Kentucky for Mitch McConnell. I want to go to Jeff Zeleny, who's been covering that race for us. And Jeff, you know, one of the things we saw here, Allison Lundergan-Grimes made some mistakes, even though she had a lot of help also from the Clintons and a lot of support, pretty well-funded campaign. But Mitch McConnell, who's never lost, ran a almost perfect campaign.
He did, George. He has never lost. This is his sixth term, his sixth win. It was his toughest campaign by all respects, but he took this seriously from the very beginning. But, George, I think one thing sums up why Allison Grimes was unable to defeat Mitch McConnell. It comes in this flyer. It was in the mailboxes of every voter, every Republican voter in Kentucky. It has a face of Allison Grimes and a face of Barack Obama. One voter gave this to me today and said that's what they got. So she was just unable to overcome this deep concern and deep distrust in the president and distrust in the Democratic Party.
And I want to thank you, Jeff. I want to go to Nicole Wallace as well. We see a lot of new women candidates on the Republican side this time around, a lot of focus on women's issues by the Democrats. But one of the things we're seeing out of Kentucky is that Grimes didn't do all that well with women, only won them by about 5 points.
Yeah, I think Republicans got a lot smarter in how they talked about some of the issues that had in the past alienated women. You saw in the Colorado race, and I know we're still waiting for any information about how that one's going. Republicans in the past 2 cycles allowed abortion and contraception to be lumped together. In this cycle, they finally got smart about separating them, and you saw Republican candidates talking about putting birth control pills over the counter in a way that let women come back to Republicans who maybe, no matter where they stood on the abortion issue, were put off by hearing Republican candidates talk about reproductive rights and contraception in the same breath. So I think you saw smarter language from Republicans that affected all women. And then I think you saw some fantastic women who I hope they all win tonight that could become the new face of a Republican Party. We could see a more female and a younger Republican Party if some female candidates like Mia Love, Elise Stefanik, who is a House candidate, Barbara Comstock, who's also a House candidate, and Joni Ernst, who's running for the Senate in Iowa. If they have a good night tonight, I think we could turn a page as Republican women and highlight these women.
And we're going to be watching that. I want to bring in Donna Brazil, of course, a Democratic strategist, longtime ABC News contributor as well. You've been through a lot of these election nights. Speaking of Kentucky, big state for the Clintons. Allison Lundergan Grimes close to Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton won it first time he ran in 1992. They have a sentimental attachment to that state, and Hillary went in as well, but it wasn't enough.
George, look, Allison was a Clinton delegate in 2008. She had a hard time explaining to Kentucky voters who she supported in the last presidential election. She tried to make it a choice between herself and Mitch McConnell. Unfortunately, there was a significant headwind that she had to overcome. But you know what? She's a first-time federal candidate. She's 35 years old. We'll see more of her in the future.
And Bill Kristol, talk a little bit more about Mitch McConnell. He never gives away any emotion on his face whatsoever. Very terse guy, all business, yet he never loses.
Yeah, he runs extremely disciplined and tough campaigns, and you look at the numbers, and the voters of Kentucky don't love him, but they reelect him. They seem to do it every time by 4, 5, 6, 7 points. He will be, conceivably, could well be the majority leader of the United States Senate, which is something he has dreamed of being since he became to the Senate. I'd say, unlike a lot of senators who come there to run for president or to just generally be personalities in Washington or maybe advance a pet issue, I think the one thing Mitch McConnell has wanted for 30 years is to be majority leader of the United States Senate.
And he did say when he was out on the campaign trail, well, if he's the leader of the Senate, he'll be calling the plays. We'll see how true that ends up being. I want to go to Nate Silver right now. Of course, you all remember him from 2012. Really made his name as a political forecaster, getting all 50 states right on the eve of the election. And Nate, you're looking closely at 538.com at these races as well. Coming into the night, you projected a 76% chance that the Republicans would take control of the Senate, would win the 6 seats or more that they needed, and that's already moving up.
Yeah, it's 78% based on the projection in Kentucky. We're being very conservative, not trying to account for any information from Virginia or what McConnell's margin of victory might be. But certainly everything we've seen so far, and it's early, says the GOP's going to have a pretty good night, in line with projections or maybe a bit better.
So far, a little bit better. But you did see there was a relative amount of uncertainty. Before the 2012 campaign, I don't remember the exact number, but I thought you said it was like a 90-95% chance based on what you were seeing that President Obama would win. Not quite as certain for the Republicans. A lot of things could go wrong in these individual states for them.
That's right. And you do have some quirky states later on, Alaska, Kansas, where you have slow vote counts, unusual circumstances. The fact they're doing well so far in these East Coast states is a good sign. North Carolina is an important one. Democrats have a must-win state in New Hampshire, a almost has to win in North Carolina. If they lost Virginia, then it's probably game over. So, again, we don't want to get too ahead of ourselves. I'm just saying you probably feel more comfortable if you're a Republican watching these results right now than a Democrat.
So far, that is true. Nate Silver, we're coming back to you a lot tonight. I want to go to Alicia Mendez now from Fusion, our sister network, and you're tracking social media all night long. What do you have now?
Facebook, lots of people talking. In fact, more than 5 million voters have shared the fact that they voted just in the last 24 hours. But here's what they're talking about on Facebook. Number 1 issue, taxes. Number 2, marijuana. That's on the ballot in a number of states. Obamacare, education, and ISIS. Really national issues that people are focused on. And my favorite story of the day, the voter selfie. If you look at GeoTV research, we know that peer pressure is a major motivator for voting. Could it be that this is the future of democracy?
Right.
Well, they did the selfies, but did the voters between 18 and 29 actually come out and vote? We'll find out about that from the selfies. You know, there's some races we're not going to be able to spend a lot of time on tonight, some of the ones that were less competitive, but we did learn now that South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, Republican senator from South Carolina, has been reelected as well. And this is I want to bring in Martha Raddatz on this. You know, he's had been a member of the Armed Services Committee. His specialty is foreign affairs, along with John McCain. And his reelection guarantees there will be a thorn in the side of President Obama on foreign policy for the next 2 years.
And he already has been quite a thorn in the side. I mean, he has just hammered President Obama over the last couple of years, especially, starting with Benghazi, over and over and over again. Lindsey Graham, John McCain, both of them hammering the president on Benghazi, on ISIS, on arming rebels in Syria, and none of that is going to go away.
And yet, when Obama first got elected, Lindsey Graham was his favorite Republican. Worked with him on immigration, worked with him on climate change, even suggested he would be willing to raise taxes as part of a budget deal. The big question for Lindsey Graham was, would he face a Tea Party challenger? He didn't. He survived that big win. Now, George, I wouldn't be surprised to see him looking into running for president.
He did mention that during the course of the campaign, but do you really believe it?
I wouldn't be surprised. He'd love to be on that stage. I don't know how formidable a candidate he would be, but he would love to be on that stage.
I think there's no question he would definitely love to be on it. We'll see how well he would do, although South Carolina, an early state that is critically important. Let me go back to David Plouffe on this issue, David. You know, the president in Congress, the president and these senators, have been so much talk about that, about whether or not he was reached out enough to those who wanted to work with him early on. What's your sense of the feeling in the White House over that history and where they are now?
Yeah, I'm not a believer in the few martinis would have solved the dysfunction in Washington, but I do think that I assume both sides are going to be earnestly deciding if there's some deal space here in the next few months. I really think that's all you have, because the Republican presidential primary in particular is going to get it going in earnest. And that will cloud the ability, I think, of Republicans in Washington maybe looking for compromise. But my sense is, you know, particularly if the Republicans were to win the Senate, they've got a very tough 2016 set of Senate races and the White House they want to take back. And they didn't rehabilitate their party image. If they have a good night tonight, it's not going to be because they overperformed. So I think they're going to have to show the ability, whether it's on immigration, on the economy, to get some things done.
That's an important point as well. Let me bring in Matthew Dowd on that. We see the disapproval of the Republican Party a little bit higher, better, but a little bit higher than the Democrats right now. And I'm struck by what Rand Paul, the Republican senator, said last week when he was up in Detroit. He said the Republican Party brand sucks. A lot of polling evidence supporting that point.
Well, to me, it's a fascinating thing that have come out of these early numbers. We talked a little bit about it. 2/3 of the country think we're on the wrong track. 80% of the country thinks they don't trust the government to do what's right. But we are having an election primarily between two parties, both of who a majority of the country has an unfavorable view of them. And so the only place we actually have an independent is Kansas, but the country is having to choose in a sour environment where they're frustrated, where they're disappointed, between two parties, both of which they don't like.
David, pull up some more numbers from the exit poll, which illustrate.
Well, that's the extraordinary thing. Even in the McConnell race, when you take a look at the opinion of McConnell in his home state, it seems, look at 52% unfavorable opinion of McConnell, only 46 favorable. It seems they recognize the power of having their senator as the majority leader in Washington, hoping to preserve that role for him. And we're seeing that in some of the other poll results. Look at this. When it comes to President Obama, dissatisfied or even angry with the Obama administration, 59% heading to the polls today. It seems some voters do want to block this administration from doing anything in these final 2 years.
And I think that's in the national level. That's at Washington. Bill Kristol, let me bring you back in on this issue, though, of governors. A lot of Republican governors in some tight races right now. And this notion of rejection could end up blowing back on them.
Anti-incumbent sentiment hurts Republican governors just as it hurts incumbent Democratic senators. I think it will hurt incumbent Democratic senators a little more across the board. They voted for Obamacare and other legislation that turned out to be pretty unpopular, and they're associated with the president, who's pretty unpopular. The governors can sort of stand or fall on their own, but it is striking how strong the anti-incumbent mood is. One point we were just talking about the Republicans, if they win the majority, not to get ahead of ourselves. I think the last couple of days I've spoken to a couple of senators, a couple of candidates, a lot of staffers. The disagreement about what Republicans should do if they win the majority, those disagreements are deep. There are people who think we've got to go for the big, do something big. You can't just win a majority and then do small ball. A lot of people are saying, no.
And that plays out in the presidential campaign, because you got Mitch McConnell, who might be coming in as the leader, perhaps, if this all goes this way, and who would want to try to get something done as the leader. You've got Ted Cruz, senator from Texas, out there talking about investigation, oversight, and really taking the president on.
And Mitch McConnell, I think, could well have 5 or 6 Republican senators running for president. Cruz, Paul, Rubio, Lindsey Graham, as we've just heard, and Steve Hayes. He told Steve Hayes he wanted to run for president. I think Rob Portman's looking at it. You can get one or two more. So suddenly, these people have their own agendas. It's going to be very tough for Mitch McConnell to manage that
brings up a phrase used by one of your other former bosses, Dick Gephardt, who talks about leading the Senate is like trying to herd cats.
Right. So imagine that. I mean, it'll be March or April, and let's just say they're trying to get immigration reform done. You'll have Ted Cruz out in Iowa saying no way, no how, no Obama amnesty. It's going to be a very complicated piece of business, I think, particularly because the Democrats may not have a competitive primary, and theirs could be 8, 10, 12 people really fighting it out with no clear front runner. It's going to be a fascinating race.
Yeah, all the fight looks like it will probably be on one side in the presidential. We're coming up on 7:30 right now. Some more polls are closing. So let's reset where we are right now as we do hit 7:30. The polls have closed now in West Virginia. But first, I want to say that, of course, let's remind everybody it's going to take 6 seats the Republicans need to get control of the Senate. That's out of a battleground map of about 16 competitive races. And we want to look right now at West Virginia, where Shelley Moore Capito, the Republican, is expected to win now. We're calling that a winner for Shelley Moore Capito. She will be the first Republican senator from the state of West Virginia in more than 50 years, the first woman senator ever, and that is the first switch of the night. The first switch of the night. That was a Democratic seat, has been for so long, but Shelley Moore Capito has defeated Natalie Tennant. The other poll closing right now, North Carolina, and this is a tight race. Incumbent Senator Kay Hagan up against the Speaker of the House, Tom Tillis. This is likely to be the most expensive Senate race in the country, certainly with the outside spending. Tom Tillis has used the issue of President Obama against Kay Hagan, but the state legislature in North Carolina, not all that popular. That has been weighing down on Tillis. This race is quite close right now. And, of course, let's review what we already know. In Kentucky, Mitch McConnell will be returning to the Senate for his 6th term. He's the Republican leader of the Senate, hoping to become the majority leader. He defeated Allison Lonergan Grimes. In Georgia, Michelle Nunn, the daughter of the former senator, up against David Perdue. This one is very close, has been close all through the race. Now, the issue here is that if neither one of these candidates gets 50% of the vote, there will be a runoff, and that runoff will not be until January 6th. So if this is close tonight, we could be waiting a long time to see how that one plays out. And in the state of Virginia, the incumbent Mark Warner is up against the incumbent Mark Warner, the Democrat, is up against Republican Ed Gillespie, the former chair of the Republican National Committee. You see some of the vote coming in already. Of course, we ask you not to pay all that much attention to what you're seeing coming in, because those results come in from different parts of the state, which could weight it one way or the other. But that is the big map of switches so far. One pickup for the Republicans, and not an unexpected one, John Carl. West Virginia has been trending Republican in presidential races for a long time.
And it's hard to find a state where President Obama is more unpopular than West Virginia. This was a state that Hillary Clinton won in the primary. This was a state that, the Democrats just didn't have a chance from the start, and they got exactly the candidate they want, Shelley Moore Capito, a former captain of the Duke tennis team, but also a very popular figure in West Virginia, Congresswoman, and ran a good campaign.
Dave, you have the numbers from West Virginia?
Yeah, I do. Take a look at this. The direction of the country, the worst numbers we've seen of the night on a micro level. 78% say this is the wrong track. Republicans knew West Virginia was going to be a prime target with Rockefeller retiring. They know that the sentiment, and as George points out, in presidential years, West Virginia has not been voting Democrat in quite some time.
It's just not a Democratic state anymore, Matthew Dowd.
To me, West Virginia always was a Democratic state, and I remember full well in 2000, people thought it was a late, big, long pass to take West Virginia when we went in there with a lot of money and a lot of time in the last 6 weeks of the race. And ever since 2000, for 60 years before that, it had voted Democratic. Since 2000, it shifted, and it's not shifting back.
Donna Brazil, of course, you were running Al Gore's campaign in 2000. A lot of people said it was the issue of guns that really turned on him.
It was guns. It was also coal. Look, President Obama received 36% of the vote. The state has been trending to the right for a few decades now. I think a few decades, but clearly Ms. Capito is the daughter of a former governor. She was quite popular. This was a tough state.
There's no question about it. It has become a very, very tough state. And as John pointed out, this was a state where President Obama always had so much trouble, even Hillary Clinton beating him so badly there in the primaries. I want to go back out in the field. I think we have Jeff Zeleny as well, who's been covering West Virginia. Shelley Moore Capito, we shouldn't take too much away from her. She also ran a very good race.
She really did. I mean, she's been in the House of Representatives for several years, George, so she's very much a known quantity in Washington, but she ran a very tough race. I mean, she was out campaigning sometimes 6, 7, 8 events a day. So she was not walking into this, but the history of this and the changing factor of the country cannot be overlooked here. As you said, since 1956, it's been the last time a Republican was elected to the Senate. So she will be part of a new stream of faces, a new generation of Republican senators that really is going to look considerably different when they convene next in January, George.
Okay, Jeff, thanks very much. One thing we haven't talked about too much yet tonight is the House. In that place, I want to bring in Cokie Roberts on this, of course, has followed the House for so long. This may be a place where the rejection of incumbents will not take hold. It looks almost certain that Republicans are actually going to add to their majority in the House. The unpopularity of President Obama much stronger than any anti-incumbent sentiment against the House members.
Well, in some in House seats that they shouldn't be in terms of who the voters are. But it is going to be probably not that big a night, but just that because, George, these seats are so safe, the way that the district lines are drawn, that the Republicans pretty much have most of the seats that they can take.
Well, they picked up so many in 2010.
If we get a big wave, they can all go. And I would certainly look in New England and New York to see if there are changes there. Because for years and years and years, of course, we had moderate Republicans representing those states. And then they all just disappeared in a Democratic wave. Some of them look like they are primed to come back.
You know, that's an important point because I actually spent some time up with John Boehner up in Maine. He was campaigning all through the Northeast in those final weeks because he was trying to get some moderate Republicans back. They had all been wiped out, and hoping that would strengthen his hand as a deal maker.
It would. It definitely would. I mean, what we've had over the last few years is a southern and western, to some degree, Republican Party, and a northern and far coastal western Democratic Party. And it makes it much harder to get something done. And to have extremes ideologically and regionally just makes compromise very difficult.
John Carl, let me go to you on that. You know, the White House, maybe we can bring in David Plouffe on this later as well, quite frustrated with John Boehner. They thought he wasn't putting the wood to his members enough. Of course, he and his colleagues believe, no, they did as much as they could given the composition of their conference.
Yeah, the president had his famous game of golf with John Boehner, the one and only time he played with a Republican member of Congress. And they did go down the road of that so-called grand bargain on the budget. But what's interesting is the president's had a little bit of a relationship with Boehner. It's been one of frustration, but he's had almost no relationship with Mitch McConnell, the man that will now, you know, if the Republicans win control of the Senate and emerges the majority leader. Virtually no relationship. He does have a relationship with Vice President Biden, but I asked today, George, when the last time Mitch McConnell met one-on-one with President Obama, and the McConnell people couldn't give me an answer yet. They're getting back to me. It's been a long time.
We'll wait for that. And we're going to come back to this discussion later in the night, but I do want to go back to Jeff Zeleny right now, because you've also been looking at the state of Virginia, where Mark Warner is up against Ed Gillespie, the former Republican national chair. And Jeff, as I was saying earlier, this had looked pretty comfortable for Warner, well-funded candidate. This was a state that President Obama won 2 years ago for a long time, but Gillespie came on strong, has been coming on strong in these final weeks. Talk about that campaign.
Well, George, I'm really surprised by this tonight. So far, I would say it's the biggest surprise of the night. Senator Mark Warner is viewed as the most moderate Democrat around. I mean, he is the...
I think we just lost Jeff's there, but I'm going to bring this over to Bill Kristol because, Bill, I think I chuckled a couple weeks ago when you said on This Week, watch out for Ed Gillespie because he was so far behind, but you were calling it then.
Well, I think people have overstated how much Virginia has become a Democratic state. It's exactly, I think in 2012, David would know this better than I, it was exactly at the national average. I think Obama won Virginia by exactly the same percentage he won the nation by. And so if you have a Democratic senator who voted for Obamacare, which has been unpopular in Virginia, has had particular troubles in Virginia, and a competent Republican candidate against him, I always figured it would close at the end, and Gillespie may lose by a point or two, or three, but he may also nip Warner, I suppose. We don't know yet. I think that was a case where the early polls just showed Warner's big name ID. He had been governor and senator, and Gillespie was unknown.
And that brings up the question, David Plouffe, these purple states, Virginia, Colorado, where we're going to be looking especially at the difference in the composition of the electorate between midterm election years and presidential years.
Well, if you look, Virginia, Colorado, Iowa, my suspicion is even in these races that are happening today, if they were happening in 2016, the Democrats will win them all. I think Democrats have a good chance to win Florida and Michigan. So, but Virginia is the quintessential battleground state right now. So if you revert to midterm turnout, now I do think Warner still has outside strength in the state. And you got to remember with Virginia, most of the Democratic Northern Virginia vote comes in very late.
That's right.
But it's a surprise. I thought this would be more like a 6-7 point race, and we'll see.
And the other thing we're going to have to watch there, Donna Brazil, I remember when Terry McAuliffe, the governor of Virginia, was running as well. He was up by several points going into Election Day, and it ended up being quite close. I think he was up by 7, and he ended up winning by 2 or so. And one of the things we're going to have to watch here, we're going to have to watch it in North Carolina, we're going to have to watch it in Georgia, is this proportion of the electorate that is a minority electorate. How does that compare to the presidential years?
It's still a very tough state. I agree with David. Virginia is a battleground state. Look, Hampton roads typically come in late. We also have to look at Northern Virginia. But in the last few weeks of the campaign, one of the things I noticed watching television, of course, is that Ed Gillespie did very well during the debates. Ed has spent a lot of time working with local candidates, working with the local Republican Party, basically rebuilding it after the terrible gubernatorial race. I'm not surprised it's closing in, but Mark Warner had John Warner, the former Republican senator, on the trail with him the last few days. That might help him close the deal. Mark Warner's message was, I can work with Republicans. Ed Gillespie's message was, I have a new plan to change Washington, D.C. We'll see what happens, but I predicted that this race would be close as well.
Gillespie actually had a plan on health care.
A full plan
that was really what other Republicans would call Obamacare light. I mean, it did a lot of what Obamacare does. It extended insurance coverage to the uninsured. It, pre-existing conditions were covered. Did just about everything besides expanding Medicaid. It was a full-blown plan.
Let me go to Nicole Wallace on that there. And while Nicole's talking, David, if you can see if we have any exit polls on how Obamacare did. A year ago, you would have thought this was going to be what the entire election was about. Now, most of the Republican candidates talked about repealing Obamacare, but it wasn't really central in most of the campaigns.
Well, and it varied state by state. In Iowa, one of the reasons Joni Ernst went up a couple weeks ago was because Iowans received bills that reflected the changes that Obamacare had in the cost of health care in the state of Iowa. So it was very particular to the states where the law resulted in higher health care costs. So I think this is another undercurrent. And I think that Ed Gillespie's plan, the most exciting thing to me about Senator Ed Gillespie is that he would be one of the Republicans who would get there and govern. And I think that what we have to look for tonight, I think that we talked about how the Senate would be full of Republicans running for president. It would also be full of younger, more female Republicans who would be interested in governing. And I think that to me, I know Matthew Dowd talked about all the reasons to be cynical and pessimistic, which is Matthew's beat. But I think there are a lot of reasons to be optimistic about what could happen tonight, especially as Republicans. We could have a great night. We could have some great new women in the Senate, and we could have some young people. Wait, don't rain on my parade just yet. But I think Ed would get there. Ed would get there, and he would govern. And this is an important piece of legislation. If he's successful, if he wins tonight, I'd be excited to see him try to govern.
Well, when I say with the mood of the country, I actually think it provides a tremendous opportunity. I think we're in a tremendous time where if somebody had a populist, forward-looking vision and message, they would be light on fire in this electorate going forward in 2016. The problems, I think, for the Republicans is it would be great if they decided to govern and do what's right and bring a consensus together. I think there's lots of pressures that we've talked about for them not to do that. But I actually believe in this sour environment, there's a tremendous opportunity for somebody with a positive, forward-looking, populist message to emerge.
And we're going to talk about 2016 a lot more later tonight. Before we take a quick break, I want to go back to New Hampshire because those polls are going to close at 8 o'clock. Ron Claiborne up in New Hampshire. Of course, that's the race between Jeanne Shaheen, the incumbent Democrat, and Scott Brown, the former Republican senator from Massachusetts, who first got elected to the Senate from Massachusetts, running hard against Obamacare, one of his big issues.
Well, that's right. Really, the president, the popularity or rather unpopularity of President Obama in this state has become a big issue in this campaign. And the irony here, George, is that this is a state that the president carried somewhat easily in 2008, 2012. Since then, his approval ratings in the state have sunk to the low 40% levels. And Scott Brown has managed to more or less successfully attach Jeanne Shaheen, a popular former governor, to the president, running and pounding the theme that Shaheen had voted 99% of the time with President Obama. That appeared to stick with a number of voters. And, of course, Shaheen fighting back, saying that Scott Brown was, in effect, a carpetbagger, trying to make the Senate seat in New Hampshire a consolation prize because 2 years ago he lost his Massachusetts seat to Senator Warren.
That's right. Do we have any evidence on David Muir on how that was cutting the carpetbagger
Yeah, this is
issue?
interesting. Preliminary exit polls, obviously, at this hour, but they have rejected the carpetbagger charges. In fact, 54% think Brown has lived in New Hampshire long enough to represent that state effectively.
David and I both lived in New England. We know how that works.
How that works. A lot of people moved to New Hampshire.
It's all one big place.
And Daniel Webster represented both Massachusetts and New Hampshire. I mean, I'm not saying Scott Brown's Daniel Webster, but there is some precedent.
In the House. In the House. And actually, I moderated the debate up in New Hampshire last week. A local reporter, tried to make an issue of whether or not he really understood the geography of the state, where Sullivan County was. It turned out that Scott Brown was right. The reporter was wrong. That ended up working for him. But, of course, we shouldn't go too far here either. Jeanne Shaheen, very popular in that state, has a lot of support, has a long record in that state as well.
And one thing very telling, George, more New Hampshire voters are upset with GOP leaders in Congress than they are with Obama, 67% to 57% in these early
Okay, we are going to take a break right now. I want to bring it back to Dan Harris. Pick it up, Dan.
Hey, George, we do have a little bit of news to tell you about. We have a projection we can bring you in the governor's race in Ohio. ABC News is projecting that John Kasich, the Republican incumbent, will emerge victorious from his race against Ed Fitzgerald. This is not surprising because a lot of people have nominated Ed Fitzgerald as the guy who ran the worst campaign of the cycle. It is, however, consequential because John Kasich will be a Republican running a key state during the 2016 presidential election, and he may himself run for president. A lot of people have discussed that. Let's bring in Rick Klein, our chief political editor. Did I get your title right?
Political director.
Political director, close enough. People get sensitive about these things. Kasich, real deal presidential candidate now for 2016?
100%. You can make an argument he will be the biggest winner for 2016 of the night. Ohio is always a battleground state. Everyone expects it to be a close election. John Kasich put the lie to that. He was able to romp, and he looks like he's cruising to a big victory over a very flawed Democratic candidate. But this is going to be item one on his presidential resume. He isn't known very well nationally yet. That will change, and soon.
But it isn't part of this romping, you made an allusion to it, but part of it is that Fitzgerald ran such a bad campaign. It came out over the summer that he was found several years ago. This guy, by the way, is a former FBI agent.
Right.
And he was found in a car with somebody's wife, but not his wife.
That's right.
And he also was found at the time not to have a driver's license and didn't have one for 10 years. Do I have that right?
That's right. It was about 3 or 4 in the morning. A good time to be out, of course. That's a big piece of it. But for John Kasich right now, Ohio is just such a prototypical battleground. And the fact that he was able to show leadership there, he won as part of this 2010 wave. We'll talk a lot about that tonight. A group of Republicans, some of them are having a really hard time hanging on to their jobs tonight. They may be in trouble. John Kasich is an exception to that rule. And he's able to say, look, I'm a governor. I'm someone who gets things done. I've got some experience actually leading a state, a big critical battleground state that you need to win if you want to win a presidential election. All that works very well.
The other governor we have to be watching tonight in terms of 2016 is Scott Walker from Wisconsin.
Yeah, and it's a much different story with Scott Walker. He has been a polarizing presence in that state, the famous recall attempt. He has shown some late motion, some late movement, and if he's able to emerge victorious, maybe he still has a chance. But I'll tell you, a lot of Republicans that I've talked to, they're still surprised about this ride. They think that his 2016 argument took a big hit.
So let's get back to Mr. Fitzgerald from Ohio for a second. Let's walk through some of the sort of wildest candidates from this cycle. Fitzgerald has to be near the top there, given the peccadillos that we just described. But we've also got the kissing congressman.
Yeah, Vance McCallister down in Louisiana. Now, he said he would not run for re-election after he was found making out with a staffer of his, but he's reconciled with his wife. He's back on the ballot. He's running against someone that's got the strong support of the Duck Dynasty cast. So that's a colorful race down in Louisiana.
Right, that's Zach Dasher.
That's right.
Now, he is related to the Duck Dynasty family. They did actually endorse McCallister in the last race, but then withdrew their endorsement. It's amazing that we're talking about a race where Duck Dynasty is a key variable.
Oh, that could swing everything there. And Louisiana, you have to you potentially go to a runoff there, so we'll probably be talking about overtime there, but a lot of the polls have shown that Mr. McAllister may not be part of it.
Now, in terms of interesting candidates this year, we would be remiss if we left out Michael Grimm from here in New York. He is now facing a 20-count federal indictment on charges of tax evasion, fraud, and cash payments to illegal workers at a restaurant he ran here in Manhattan. And, quite famously, he threatened a reporter on live television after the inauguration speech, the State of the Union speech. He said, I will break you in half, I believe, like a little boy or something along those lines.
Like a little boy, exactly. Now, some people actually think this may have worked to Michael Grimm's favor. And some
in Staten Island?
In Staten Island, of all places. Again, you have a Democratic candidate who was not the best of candidates. But more than that, for Michael Grimm, he's able to say to an electorate there, hey, look, I'm getting things done. The feds are coming after me. So even though he's under indictment, he is actually favored to win that election, win re-election to the House. The trial's coming up. There'll be some motions filed in the next couple of weeks. So it could fall apart pretty quickly for him.
Given the unpopularity of reporters, do you think his threat to that reporter actually helped his popularity?
I suppose that's a possibility when you get at it. I think when you talk about some of these candidates, though, the local ties. And if you're able to make an argument to the voters of a district, look, I am different than the Washington establishment. Sometimes they're coming after me. The kind of embattled incumbent thing. That can work fairly well, and it actually plays into an argument.
Based on what we know thus far, it's early in the night. Based on what we know, do you think we will know tonight, by the end of the night, whether the Senate has fallen into Republican hands?
I don't think that, but there's a couple of things that I'm watching right now. Virginia and that Senate race, it is very close as the election results are flowing in. A lot of folks on the Democratic side thought this would not be a problem at all. Mark Warner, such a strong incumbent. If it's closer than expected or if he goes down, that could be a long night, because I think there's a couple of other East Coast races in New Hampshire and North Carolina. If any of the three of those that I just mentioned, New Hampshire, North Carolina, Virginia, if any of those flip, that's the scenario where we could see an actual projection for Republicans. So far as you know, they are +1 on their way to 6. They held the Mitch McConnell seat, so they're holding serve. They're doing what they're expected to do so far. There's a chance still that this is a big wave.
Cokie, let's bring you in. I don't know how you feel about tennis analogies, but what is your view of whether we will know by the end of the night whether the Republicans have reached the magic 6 number?
I think Rick had it just right. The truth is that we've got these 2 runoffs, and that's the thing that has us not able to predict. In Georgia, it's quite close, and if that goes to a runoff in January after the new Congress has come into session, that could be the determinant. In Louisiana, it's almost certain to go to a runoff in December. So unless the Republicans have already picked up their 6 without Louisiana and Georgia, we could easily not know tonight, but it's possible they would have. That's what Rick was saying. If they get Virginia, North Carolina, New Hampshire, then they'll probably get their 6 tonight.
So there's still suspense in the air. But let me ask you a question. Let's just assume for a second that the Republicans do take back the Senate tonight. Do you think part of that, in hindsight, will be because they recruited better candidates this time around? In years past, they've had candidates who had to make advertisements to deny that they were a witch, for example, or one candidate who talked about quote-unquote legitimate rape.
Yes. No, there was no rape in this campaign. There were no witches in this campaign. That was a big plus. No, look. The Republicans, really, the last time around, were very well positioned to take the Senate. And their candidates were just simply unacceptable to the majority of voters in their states. In some cases, there were candidates who had knocked off sitting Republican senators, as in Indiana, in the primary. So it was just not a good batch. And the leadership of the Republican Party was very well aware that they had in 2010 and 2012 candidates that were not really very useful to them in terms of winning. So they worked very, very hard this time around to keep those candidates out and to support in primaries the candidates they thought could win a general election. So they were much, much better positioned in terms of their candidates. But look, they were also much, much better positioned in terms of the states they were up in and in terms of attitudes toward the president. I mean, in West Virginia, which we have already called for Shelley Moore Capito, she was the first Republican elected in 56 years. Now, we keep saying it's really basically become a Republican state, but interestingly, in the exit polls, almost 50% of the people identified themselves as Democrats. So they still think of themselves as Democrats, even though they were voting Republican in this situation. So it was just a really bad year for Democrats, as well as it being a good year for Republicans.
Yeah, and the terrain is going to change in 2016. It's going to be much more favorable to the Democrats. Stand by, Cokie. I want to bring in on this issue of quality candidates. I want to bring in ABC's Jeff Zeleny. Jeff, you've spent a lot of time talking to the potential next Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, who did a lot of the work to recruit candidates. He actually addressed this head on, didn't he? He talked about how big a priority it was for Republicans to find candidates that were palatable to broad audiences.
He did, Dan. He's been talking about this repeatedly for the last year. But I asked him yesterday. We caught up with him in Lexington. He had a smile on his face, a bounce in his step. And I asked him, what's the biggest factor here? He said recruiting candidates. He said, Jeff, we learned the lessons from the last 2 election cycles, and we decided we need to recruit candidates. But they decided something else, Dan. They decided that Republicans needed to start playing in Republican primaries. That's not something that happened in 2010 or 2012. But in 2014 and this year, the Republican establishment got involved, incredibly involved, and tried to shove out some candidates who might be problematic and try and bring in some who would be stronger. So the story of the night, if Republicans happen to win some of these key Senate seats, is recruiting strong candidates. We made it all the way through the election without one of those embarrassing fumbles, those embarrassing gaffes that we saw so much of in 2010 and 2012.
So, Jeff, where does this leave the Tea Party?
Well, the Tea Party, we're going to hear a lot more from them once the new Congress convenes, because especially in the House of Representatives, I mean, if Senator McConnell happens to win the majority, if Republicans happen to be the majority party in the Senate, they are going to be guiding a fractious group now. We heard it again this week, just a couple days ago. Senator Ted Cruz said that he believes one of the first orders of business should be to investigate the Obama administration, hold hearings on the Obama administration. I asked Senator McConnell that very question. He said, no, we need to be a responsible governing majority. We need to show that we can govern. So that is the tension right there. And the presidential campaign is going to be starting just any minute now. As soon as tomorrow, certainly by January, it's going to be underway. And those candidates who are in the Senate, Dan, are going to bring the party rightward, especially Senator Ted Cruz and a few others. So the Tea Party is still there, but this is an election of moderates. We saw the Republican Party trying to moderate itself in candidates across the country.
So what is Mitch McConnell doing tonight? Is he popping champagne in his hotel room?
He's not popping champagne, but I talked to one close aide who's in the room with him when the result was called right at 7 o'clock. And he was all smiles. He was very happy. He expected this outcome, but he is still nervous because other Republicans are not as far along as he is. He is worried about one state in particular, the state of Kansas, an independent wild card there that could hold his Senate Majority Leader position, a position that he has worked for and dreamt about since he was a little boy here in Kentucky. So he is worried and watching other states across the country. But I'm just told just a moment ago that Allison Lundergan Grimes, the Democratic rival to him, has called and conceded the end of a very bruising campaign here, a $53 million bruising campaign. She called, conceded, and aide said it was brief but cordial, Dan.
And a big age difference between those two candidates. Jeff, we'll be coming back to you many times throughout the course of this evening. Thank you for your analysis and reporting. Let's go down to ABC's Chief Business Correspondent, Rebecca Jarvis, who's here. Rebecca, you've been looking at the exit polls. It shows so much discontent about the economy. Just walk us through what you've seen.
I'm really struck by the pessimism that's coming out of these exit polls, Dan. And what we're really seeing here, I think, is what's going on beneath the surface. A lot of the numbers as a headline look strong. Last midterm, unemployment was 9.5%. This midterm, unemployment is now 5.9%. But you dig a little deeper there and you see that a lot of those jobs, the new job creation that we're seeing in this country, is the lower wage jobs. 44% of the job growth in the last handful of years has been coming from retail jobs, service jobs, the kind of things that pay close to minimum wage. In addition to that, the actual wages in this country have now been stagnant for a decade, and you still have multiple people, 3 million people, long-term unemployed in this country. That's 33% of the overall unemployed population has been out of work now for more than 6 months. It becomes a desperate search at that point for so many. Plus, the 7 million people who are only in part-time work because the economy doesn't offer them something more. So you look in those numbers and you see that. And another really fascinating thing, and I think it's going on here, is you look at the stock market. And so many people, even President Obama, will point to the stock market as we are up now in the last 5 years, 77% on the Dow. That's huge growth in stocks. But so many people haven't participated in it. The majority of Americans now don't have their money in stocks. They did before the Great Recession, but they sold at the lows. So they haven't been able to make up those losses.
So what is the forecast at this point? Do the economists that you're talking to think that by 2016 we'll have a recovery that most Americans will feel that they're actually participating in?
Even the Federal Reserve Chair, Janet Yellen, has been talking about the fact that the recovery is moving along, but it's not moving along at the dramatic pace that we want it to be moving along. Most analysts and economists are saying, sure, we're going to have growth, but it might not be the kind of growth that anybody is going to feel truly excited about. And one of the most interesting things here is right now, this year, we are on track for the best job growth and the best stock growth since 1999, but nobody is partying like it. And I think part of that comes back to this wage issue, because if wages don't keep pace with job growth, then people feel, again, like that next generation, and we saw this in the exit polls, that the next generation has less to look forward to than previous generations. That kind of mentality in the face of even really low gasoline prices, you know, we're seeing now below $3, lowest gas prices in the last 4 years. We're seeing spending is ticking up, but still people don't believe in this recovery. And I think part of it is a psychological thing. I've been hearing tonight some of the people on our panel talking about having to find candidates with a view on prosperity.
Thank you very much for your analysis. I appreciate it. We'll be right back with much more election coverage. Keep it right here on abcnews.com.
This is an ABC News election update. Now reporting, George Stephanopoulos.
Good evening. We're taking a quick break from our regular programs because millions of you have been voting all across the country today, and our election team is here tracking all the results in a national campaign with so much at stake. Control of Congress, governor's seats, and state houses, and tonight's big question, who will take the Senate? Remember that number 6. That's how many seats Republicans need to take control, facing President Obama with a united Republican Congress for his final 2 years in office. This map here shows the 16 battlegrounds we're watching most closely. It also shows what Democrats are up against. They're defending 13 of those seats, Republicans only 3. Polls have now closed in 6 of those states, and we have a switch already. It's in the state of West Virginia, where Congresswoman Shelley Moore Capito has defeated Natalie Tennant, becoming the first Democratic senator from that state in more than 50 years, the first woman senator ever. And in Kentucky, another win for the Republicans. This is not a switch, though. This is the Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, defeating Allison Lundergan Grimes. He, of course, is hoping to become the majority leader of the Senate. Polls have also just closed in the state of New Hampshire, where Jeanne Shaheen, the Democrat, up against former Senator Scott Brown, Republican. Of course, he was a senator from Massachusetts. And they've also closed in North Carolina, where Senator Kay Hagan, the incumbent Democrat, is up against the Speaker of the House, Tom Tillis. This has been the most expensive race in the country, certainly with the outside funding. It is a close one as well. And David Muir, we're learning a lot from the exit polls about what people think about the federal government.
Yeah, this is just stunning, George. And we know they're down on President Obama, but they're down on Congress as a whole, too. When you ask about trusting the government, just 2 in 10 trust the government to do the right thing always, or even just most of the time.
And that kind of anger playing out all across the battle tonight. We are going to be here all night long in an ABC News First, covering breaking news for 7 hours, including a primetime special at 10 right here on ABC. Our continuing coverage online. And we have our continuing coverage online right now. And let's talk a little bit more now about North Carolina. We have not talked about that too much yet. We were talking about New Hampshire a little bit ago. The polls have just closed. As we said, Senator Kay Hagan up against Tom Tillis, the Speaker of the State House right there. And Matthew Dowd, let me go to you with this first. This is one of the interesting ones where you had really 2 incumbents. You had Kay Hagan, who was being tied to the president by Tom Tillis, but Tom Tillis, the Speaker of the House, which had made some unpopular decisions in the state of North Carolina.
Yeah, this is absolutely true. I mean, I think, and this is a race I think is going to go down to the wire. And again, North Carolina, we've talked about this in some other states. North Carolina, one of those states that has become from a Republican state to a bellwether or battleground state in the midst of it. And I think this race will go late. And I know it's a race Democrats absolutely believe they have to win if they're going to keep the Senate.
Donna Brazile, President Obama won that state. The first time he ran, was not able to get it. Second time around, of course, the African-American vote there is so key.
Our focus in this state has been on the ground game. Once again, the Democrats knew that in order to win, they had to expand the electorate. So throughout the summer, they registered thousands of new people. Moral Mondays, a campaign started by the NAACP to get more people engaged in the electorate. This is going to be a nail biter, but at the end of the day, I think Kay Hagan can pull it off.
And you know what's interesting here is we had something today, George. The President of the United States ran a radio ad for Senator Hagan. So this is a, Obama was virtually invisible in all these states, but he came in at the end here in North Carolina to try to push the Democrat over.
And he was sort of invisible, but this was a big national security fight as well. 2,000 ads against Kay Hagan, all terrorism related, all talking about ISIS, all tying her in.
Yeah, Tom Tillis hitting her hard for being absent from hearings about ISIS was making that the issue. What are we seeing in the exit polls there?
Yeah, take a look at this about how often she sides with President Obama. 52% saying too often, 37% saying the right amount. And this was interesting, when the president came to Charlotte to speak at the American Legion Convention, she greeted him at the airport, but then issued a statement almost immediately saying the Obama administration hasn't done enough for veterans in this country. So she was very careful about appearances with the president. And look, the voters say too often. One other telling thing coming out of the early exit polling, though, is that Kay Hagan does have a 17-point lead over Tillis when it comes to women. And obviously, this is a race that comes down to who do you hate more, Raleigh or Washington?
Exactly. Let me go back to Nate Silver right now. Nate, we were talking earlier. You said you moved your odds from 76% coming in for Republican takeover of the Senate to about 78% after those first results from Kentucky came in. West Virginia changed it all or not really?
Not really. It's still 78%. That was a state where it was pretty clear what would happen based on the polls. Look, we are starting to get data now from states like New Hampshire, Georgia, North Carolina. Those states, especially North Carolina and Georgia, have a lot of early vote, too, so sometimes it can be hard to tell from the early totals. But those are the states that would move the numbers, or what happens in Virginia, of course, as well.
While we're here and while it's still pretty early in the night, I don't want to geek out too much, but can you just tell everyone how you come up with the forecast, what goes into it?
So by the end of the campaign, it's mostly polls. Earlier on, you look at past election results, fundraising data, what we call the fundamentals. And you see a lot of states, Kentucky's a good example where, look, Grimes was tied with McConnell in polls a few months ago. It's still a red-leaning state and a red-leaning year, and you saw the polls kind of move toward gravity. You see that in a lot of states, Michigan maybe for Democrats, where they've had a number of good elections in a row. So it's mostly polls by this point in the campaign, and so far the polls seem to be doing pretty well, but we'll see in Virginia.
Yeah, we'll see as that goes on. And of course, we've all gotten so skittish over the last decade or so with these exit polls, knowing how misleading they can be early in the night. Alicia Menendez here from Fusion as well, tracking social media. What do you see?
Well, let's look at Google, which tells us what people are curious about. These are the most searched candidates in the last 24 hours. Joni Ernst, no big surprise there, though I also think Senator Harkin comparing her to Taylor Swift might have given her
I was just going to ask you, what happens when you type in Joni Ernst and Taylor Swift together? How many?
You get a rendition of Shake It Off.
Yeah, they yank it from Spotify, though, 2 seconds later.
After that, Bruce Rauner, who's running for governor in Illinois, Mitch McConnell, Charlie Crist, and speaking of that Taylor Swift moment, here is that amazing tweet from Joni Ernst saying, excited to see Taylor Swift 13 in Des Moines on October 8th next year on her 1989 tour.
I'll bet she is. And I don't know the answer to this question. I don't know if you do. Has Taylor Swift said anything about this, or is she staying completely out of it?
I'm pretty sure she's staying completely out of it.
I think that makes sense. I want to switch quickly to governors because we have something here, a result in the state of Pennsylvania where the Democrat Tom Wolf has defeated the incumbent Republican Tom Corbett. And this is one of the things we were talking about earlier in the night, Matthew Dowd, this idea that this anti-incumbent feeling could blow back against some Republicans.
Yeah, I think we're going to see throughout the night as we see these races, Mitch McConnell wins and other Democrats win, and in this race a Democrat takes this, is we're going to see a mixed result but a very clear message. And so we'll see Democrats win governor's races, Republican win some Senate races. We'll see what happens in the House. But I think as you look at everything, the message is clear. The country is not in favor of incumbents right now, whether it's a senator or a governor, and they're not in favor of either political party right now. They're looking for something else. They're actually looking for leaders they think get the job done.
And that brings to the issue of business people. Now, Tom Wolf, the Democrat here, a successful business person, spent $50 million in this campaign. But Nicole Wallace, let me bring you in on this. One of the things we're seeing Democrats do against Republicans. Republican businessmen running for office, most especially Michelle Nunn running against David Perdue in Georgia, is making their business record. They're putting that on the ballot as well. She talked about him outsourcing jobs.
Which is funny because I think polls show that in a non-specific context, people want politicians who know how to run things, who want to know how to run businesses. And you were talking about the competence question with Martha and John Carl earlier. And this underpins, I think, a lot of the discontent and the dissatisfaction with Washington and with the Democratic Party. There's a feeling that not only do they do things that I don't agree with, but that they don't execute with any competence. So to me, some of this is in the way that campaigns were run, and some of these guys didn't do as good of a job defending their business record. I think the minute you let the Democrat put you on the defensive, it becomes a liability instead of an asset, and I think that's what happened with Perdue.
David?
Yeah, no. Well, I think, but Wolf, runs a family business, treats his workers well. There's a difference. I think voters don't just say, oh, you're successful in business. They say, is that someone who's going to treat people like me well? And this, Mitt Romney got on the wrong side of that question.
But let's actually show. He ran an ad based on that. Let's show it.
It's closed down. It was pretty much devastating. I don't think David Perdue understands what happens to the people. They were running as fast as they could with as much money as they could get out of the company, and just pretty much left us there hanging.
David Perdue looks out for himself. All we were.
This is actually the David Perdue we were just talking about in Georgia. And Bill, Chris, let me bring you in on this because this is something we saw in the 2012 campaign against Mitt Romney, and you've been warning for a while now that this is something Republicans have to be careful about.
Look, I think David is absolutely right in this. You can be a wealthy businessman and people don't hold it against you, and maybe there are some ads attack you for outsourcing. You can overcome that if you have a positive economic message going forward that explains how you're going to help the middle and working class. If you have an economic growth message, if you have an actual sort of populist economic message. If you don't, then you're just playing defense, and then you're the rich guy who is paying a 14% income tax. That was the moment in the campaign, the Romney moment, I think, which shows how vulnerable you can be. You're paying, 12, 14% on your income taxes. And instead of saying, I am, because that's the law, but you know what? That's President Obama's the president. The Democrats control the Senate. When I'm president, we're going to change the tax law, and I'm happy to pay more if we can get more economic growth and so forth. Instead, he just said, well, I did what the law required me to do. I didn't do anything wrong. So the key is the message going forward. I don't think being a wealthy businessman disqualifies you.
And Tom Foley running for governor in Connecticut will be another race for us to watch tonight to test all of our theories, because he
didn't pay any income tax, a very low percent, right?
Well, he lives in Connecticut. Come on, but that was a joke. I live in Connecticut. We have a Democratic governor. We pay taxes, lots of them. But I think that we watch how individualized this is, and I think Republicans especially need to pay close attention. I can't think of a Democrat who had this used against them. But I think watching these races and taking the right lessons from them is important for, I think business leaders can make great candidates if they do what Bill just suggested. They can make terrible candidates if they don't defend their records.
I want to go to David Muir in a second, but before that, Matthew, Dad, talk about this. So this outsider, there does seem to be so much hunger for an outsider when you look at the polls right now. But if it's not a businessman or businesswoman, then who?
Well, I think, an outsider can actually be somebody that just won a governor's race and viewed as outside Washington.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's still a sense that in some states and in some places, and we're going to see results as they came in, some governors are actually doing very well across the country that are perceived as being outsiders, even though they hold elective office. I think it's going to take somebody, along with what Bill and along with Nicole said, I think it's going to take somebody that says basically, I'm tired of all of this. I'm tired of the fighting. I'm tired of everything that's going on. Washington, D.C. is this dysfunctional thing. It's time to get the job done. It's time, instead of putting party, instead of having these arguments, somebody coming in, and I think a governor or a business person, but a governor, I think, somebody that comes in and basically says, enough's enough, time to get the job done.
Yeah, we also have a businesswoman running in Wisconsin, Mary Burke, and she's run a very incredible campaign, stressing job creation, bringing the state together after all of the disunity with Scott Walker. So that's another race that we should look at.
We'll keep an eye on that later in the night. What are you seeing in Pennsylvania?
Well, it's interesting, when Matt says if you have an outsider status, you can survive as an incumbent. And Pennsylvania usually re-elects its governors. But if you take a look at how the voters reacted, the independents anyway, look at this, 57% going for Wolf. And if you dig more into these exit polls, 17% of Republicans turning out of the polls in Pennsylvania voting for Tom Wolf tonight.
By the way, another one of the states that Obama actually campaigned in. And I don't think the White House is not keeping score on this. He did go out. He campaigned. He appeared for 8 candidates. 7 of them were governors. These were, by and large, in very Democratic states. But I bet that record's going to be a lot stronger than the Senate record.
Who keeps the list in the White House, David?
Well, I used to.
You're here.
But,
the presidents keep that list.
Yeah, I think it's very, very much in his head.
Right here. Battleground states, though. I mean, he did go to Wisconsin in that governor's race.
Michigan.
So I think, and I actually think that, I mean, all of us have been involved in these things. I think when people, you're not going to gain many votes by distancing yourself from your president or your party, but they can help you on turnout. And so I've never really understood that approach. I get it if you're in in some of these really deep red states, but I think some of these Democratic gubernatorial candidates were smart about how they approach this.
And I agree. I think Allison Grimes in that race, she was one of the famously wouldn't respond to say she voted for the president. I think the president's numbers are baked into the country. They're baked into the state. And what you do by not having the president and by not feeling like you're loyal to him, they basically say we're going to cede any power he has and keep it out.
Let me throw some out here, and I'll give this one to John Carr. How much blame should Harry Reid take for this? And on this specific point, should he have given his senators more chances to vote against the president?
Well, this is a great point. Harry Reid kept control of the Senate with an iron fist. He would not allow votes on amendments that would make Democrats vote against the president. I mean, Begich has been in the Senate for 6 years of Alaska. He has not had a chance to offer his own amendment for a single vote. So by controlling the agenda this way and only having, votes that were where Democrats were going to fall in line, you have all these senators who voted 97, 98, 99% of the time with the president, and that number ended up being in all the ads.
One thing you saw, Martha Raddatz, in the closing weeks of the campaign, one place where Democrats chose to start to separate themselves from the president was on this Ebola crisis. They used that as a way, coming out for travel bans, things like that.
Oh, they jumped right on that travel ban. And that, of course, was used in a lot of these battleground states. Ebola, we wanted travel ban, and the Democrats, that's how they distanced themselves immediately from the president. And you talk about these issues, and we talk about Ebola, and we talk about ISIS, and we talk about Democrats, and we talk about Republicans. It's not like anybody came up with any answers to this, or that you can really move forward. So when voters look at these issues, they are basically saying, we don't want what's happening now, but we really have no idea what we actually want.
But we're really mad about it all.
Yes.
And on the Ebola ban issue, voters 50 to 44% say they approve of the way the federal government handled Ebola in the United States. 60% obviously say they're following the Ebola news closely.
And that probably moved when Ebola went away. I think originally they didn't really feel that way when it started being really scary, but afterwards the numbers
thank you. Let's go back to Dan Harris.
Hey, George, thanks. We have we want to give you a look at some of the governor's races we're following tonight. There are many, many, many interesting governor's races. A lot of people talking about will the Republicans take back the Senate, but there are 36 governorships up for grabs tonight. Let me give you a run-through of those in a second. But before I do that, I want to tell you that we do have a result in a New Jersey Senate race. We'll show you that in a second. I guess we're off kilter with our graphics here, but staying with the governors. There it is, New Jersey. Cory Booker, the incumbent Democrat, has won another term in New Jersey, in the New Jersey Senate race. Not a huge surprise. Let's get back to the governors now. This is a race we're watching very closely, a tight race and a rematch between the Democratic incumbent Dan Malloy and his Republican opponent Tom Foley. Malloy won by 6,400 votes last time. He, like many Democrats, has been attacking his Republican opponent as a wealthy businessman. To Florida now, where Charlie Crist is running against Rick Scott. Too early for us to make a projection at this point. If Charlie Crist loses, by the way, he will be the first candidate that we know of to have lost as a Republican, a Democrat, and an independent. If you're aware of this race, it may be because of the Fangate, which we'll talk about with Rick Klein in just a moment. But Fangate, it happened at a debate when Charlie Crist brought a fan. Rick Scott didn't like that and refused to come out onto the debate stage. That will be a moment that lives in infamy for quite a while. To Maine now, where Mike Michaud is running against the incumbent Republican Governor Paul LePage, and there's also an independent in this race, Elliot Cutler, that may shake things up. You may have heard of Paul LePage of late. He's been making headlines for his response to the Casey Hickok situation. That's a nurse who came back from West Africa and was quarantined because she might have Ebola, although she has tested negative every time. By the way, Mike Michaud, if he was elected, he'd be the first openly gay person ever to be elected governor. And finally, in Massachusetts, where Martha Coakley, the Democrat, is running against Charlie Baker, the Republican, this should be, many people believe, a shoo-in in the People's Republic of Massachusetts, my home state. But Martha Coakley, who lost against Scott Brown infamously back in 2010, has been dubbed Martha Chokley by some, and some believe she could very well lose this race tonight. As advertised, Rick Klein is here. Let's talk about this Florida race.
Yeah.
The Fangate got a lot of attention and sent the signal to a lot of people that neither of these candidates is likable.
First of all, they don't like each other at all.
Yeah, well,
It
that
is
was evident.
so personal, and you saw that at that debate. But what that did for Rick Scott was crystallize a lot of the dislike, both for him and to some extent for his opponent. But I think for Rick Scott, what was dangerous about it, because it came at a moment that Charlie Crist was starting to see some momentum. So if you give people a reason to talk about your behavior on a debate stage, it just seemed childish to not be on the debate stage. It gave Charlie Crist, I think, a statewide momentum that a lot of his fellow Democrats haven't seen. We've seen a lot of skepticism in those exit polls around the fact that Charlie Crist has changed parties. A vast majority of folks believing he changed parties to win elections. Shocker, as opposed to actually reflecting his true beliefs.
If one of these parties win, if the Republican wins, if the Democrat wins, does that have a real impact on 2016, given the importance of Florida as a battleground state?
We've seen that matter quite a bit in the past. I think it's going to be so close that both sides will still consider it a battleground. Keep in mind, Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, both potential 2016 contenders. But it has a big policy impact, too, Dan. That is the state where the biggest issue they fought about is the Medicaid expansion. Hundreds of thousands of Floridians might get health insurance, and it could change a little bit of the tide around Obamacare to the extent that's an issue in 2016 if it's implemented under a Democratic governor, unlikely to be under Governor Rick Scott.
And what about this race in Connecticut? This is one of the few places where Obama actually was invited to campaign. Possible that he would make a difference here?
It is, because he is still pretty popular in pockets of the state, at least. It's still a very blue state. And what's interesting here is the way the guns issue has played out. It's been a big focus of the Republican advertising. That was the site, of course, of the Sandy Hook massacre. Connecticut actually passed some new gun control laws, and the Republican opponent in that, Grace Foley, has been using that as an issue against Malloy.
Well, you would think that in Connecticut, gun control would be popular given what happened. Why not?
Well, it's in part a base motivator. Also, what we've seen about guns in general as an issue nationwide, and especially in Connecticut, is that people believe mostly on the merits that background checks, for instance, are necessary, but they don't vote on it. And the issue is making that into a voting issue. They tend to vote in the other direction. You can get the other side's base a lot more riled up than you can the pro-background check side.
Stand by. I think we have Ron Claiborne for us at our New Hampshire affiliate. If we don't, I'm going to keep torturing you. But if we do, there he is, Ron Claiborne, my compadre from Weekend GMA. Ron, let me ask you, since you are situated evenly between Massachusetts and Maine, about both of these governor's races. Let's start with Martha Coakley, the Attorney General in Massachusetts, who's now running her second big race. Why is she not sweeping to victory easily?
Well, Dan, as you know, it is not that unusual for Massachusetts to elect Republican governors. You may remember Mitt Romney was the governor of Massachusetts, Paul Cellucci, William Weld going back a number of years. But a lot of the credit is being given to Coakley's opponent, the Republican businessman, Charlie Baker, for running a better campaign. Keep in mind, he's the one who lost to Deval Patrick 4 years ago. A lot of people think he ran a smarter, more relaxed campaign this time. And Martha Coakley, very sharp, but not the best campaigner in the world, particularly on a retail level. So a number of problems that she was facing, in addition to her own difficulties as a campaigner, a lot of baggage coming from the Patrick 4 years in office attached to her. Right now, it's looking pretty good, I'd say, for the Republican.
And what's the outlook in Maine? Tell us a little bit about Governor LePage, for example. He's a pretty brash fellow.
He is a character, if you will, narrowly winning 4 years ago. Of course, most recently, best known for his legal fight over the nurse who had been put away in quarantine, or they tried to put her in quarantine for her exposure to Ebola, the possible exposure to Ebola. He is, because it's a three-way race, keep in mind, a three-way race, appears that he may eke out a victory despite the fact that if it were a two-way race against the candidate you mentioned, the Democrat Michaud, who would be the first, Mike Michaud would be the first openly gay governor in the country. It's a three-way race, including a third-party independent candidate who is drawing away from Michaud, possibly opening the door for LePage to pull out a victory. That one's probably very likely going to be very close. In the last few days, that third-party candidate, Cutler, essentially acknowledged that he did not have a chance and freed his supporters to vote for whoever they wanted to vote. That tends to vote, we would think, be in the favor of Michaud. Nonetheless, we're looking for a close race right there. in Maine.
Yeah, but I'm just looking at some of Paul LePage's more memorable utterances of late. He called he called the legislators in his state "quote unquote" idiots. He told the NAACP to quote "kiss my butt," and he has a habit of speaking of himself in the third person. Maine is, I can say, as a guy who cut his teeth as a reporter in Maine, pretty open-minded and likes idiosyncratic political figures. Although Paul LePage doesn't seem to be particularly popular at this point, nonetheless.
That is the irony. Also, keep in mind that Maine is a state that President Obama won fairly handily in 2008 and 2012. You mentioned Connecticut, one of the few states where the president has come in to actually invited to come in and campaign for the Democratic candidate. That was also the case in Maine, where the president, just in the last few days, was up there campaigning for Mike Michaud. Whether that makes a difference, we shall see. Generally speaking, at least in presidential politics, Maine is considered a blue state. Nonetheless, latest polls show LePage with a slight edge over Michaud and Cutler.
Hey, RC, while I have you, let's talk about New Hampshire, where you are right now. You and I were emailing earlier today about these these yard signs that you saw. Tell us about what you saw in this Senate race in New Hampshire, which is, of course, one of the ones we're watching very closely tonight.
Okay, well, the incumbent Democrat, Jeanne Shaheen, a former governor, very popular, running for re-election. This is a state that has gone Democratic for the last 5 presidential elections that President Obama won both times that he ran. But right now, his popularity, his approval ratings in this state have sunk below 40%. So Scott Brown, the former Massachusetts senator who relocated to this state just last December as the Republican nominee, has been relentlessly trying to pound the idea, the message that Jeanne Shaheen voted with President Obama 99% of the time, okay? Trying to attach Shaheen to President Obama. In that vein, we came across some posters. Shaheen's posters are green and white, very distinctive, lawn posters all over the place here in the Manchester area. Posters that look like hers, same color, same writing, but they say, support Obama, vote for Shaheen, which is appears to be some kind of, in effect, dirty trick to attach President, to Shaheen and make it look like there are Shaheen posters encouraging Obama supporters, who appear to be a minority in this state, to vote for Shaheen. A dirty trick, perhaps? That's what it looks like.
And you saw Shaheen people out there actually covering these signs up.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Yeah, where they were, and they tended to disappear or have Shaheen, the authentic Shaheen signs placed in front of them. On the other side, you see a lot of signs apparently placed there by Shaheen supporters saying in the script and colors of Scott Brown's posters, carpetbagger, which is the accusation made against Scott Brown because he moved here less than a year ago from Massachusetts. I did speak to one voter earlier today who said she was genuinely undecided going in, and that she was so offended. She was offended by those carpetbagger signs that she may end up voting for Scott Brown just because of that. On the other hand, this is, there are characters in this state. I ran into one guy. I asked him how he felt about the accusation from Brown that Shaheen supports Obama 99% of the time. What did he think about Shaheen's accusations that Brown is a carpetbagger? He said he believed both of them, and as a consequence, wasn't going to vote for anyone.
Fascinating. Ron, so great to have you in New Hampshire tonight. Really appreciate it. We'll be coming back to you throughout the course of the evening. Yeah. If I can, let's see if we can get it down to Cokie Roberts, who's in our Washington bureau tonight. Cokie, now that we're on the subject of Jeanne Shaheen, very popular Senate incumbent candidate in New Hampshire, let's pivot, if we can, to the subject of women in politics this year. What trends are you seeing in terms of female candidates this year?
Well, New Hampshire has been unique in that every member of its congressional delegation has been female. And right now, not only is Shaheen in trouble, we really don't know how that race is going to come out, but that's true in one of the House races as well, where Carol Shea Porter has also been under a lot of attack this cycle, and we don't know how that one's going to come out. The governor of New Hampshire is also a woman, and she's been doing very well throughout this campaign. So, clearly the issue isn't that they're women. But the issue does, and it's not even that they're Democrats, because the governor is as well. But it is this tie to Washington that is driving people down and drawing people down. But we are seeing women around the country in all kinds of roles, running not only in the Senate. Now, of course, three of the women that we're watching closely in very tight races, Mary Landrieu in Louisiana, Kay Hagan in North Carolina, Jane Shaheen in New Hampshire, are all in trouble. But we've just called Shelley Moore Capito in West Virginia as a new woman coming to the Senate. Joni Ernst in Iowa might be a new woman coming to the Senate. So we'll see at the end of the evening whether we've stayed at the 20, where the number is right now of women in the Senate, or whether it's gone up or down. But there are also lots of women running for governor and for lieutenant governor all around the country. So we are seeing more women candidates than we have seen in previous elections.
Cokie, thank you. Now that we're talking gender, let's bring in Alicia Menendez, because you've been looking at what people are saying on Twitter, sorted by gender.
I thought you were just like, because it's my lady friend.
Well, you know, I didn't want to get fresh.
Well, you know, there is actually a big differential in terms of who's out there and who's having which conversation. So let's start by looking at Twitter. These are tweets in the last 24 hours. 37% of tweets about this election have come from women, 63% from men, meaning that men are really dominating the conversation on Twitter. And then here's some that's even...
men are bigger loudmouths when it comes to politics.
I mean, you said it, not me. And then here are the top tweeted issues from men: privacy, taxes, and energy. A very different set of issues that women are tweeting about. Take a look at these: education, LGBT issues, and wages.
I'm surprised to see privacy that high.
I think it has to do with surveillance. I also think this is like a final chapter in Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. And, you know, all night we really want to hear from people who are watching, and we know that a lot of people have been taking voter selfies, but now we want you to take candidate selfies, meaning when your candidate wins, when your candidate loses, send us a photo of your reaction.
Of your authentic, in-the-moment reaction.
You're like so excited.
Elation or dejection.
And tell us who the candidate is.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
That exhortation will be taken to heart, I'm sure. I don't know if we still have Cokie. Cokie, you still there?
Yes, I'm still here.
Because we've been talking about the role of women in this cycle. The Democrats, for many years now, have been talking about the quote-unquote war on women. Did that resonate this time around?
Well, we don't know, because the place where it really was waged the loudest was in Colorado, and we don't know how that's come out. But it was something that was beginning to grate on some women, and you were hearing that in these campaigns. You know, the women were saying, look, we're beyond just our reproductive tracts. And the candidates who got it right, apparently, are the ones who talked about economic issues, which is what the women's vote has always been. People have always gotten this wrong. Men and women vote pretty much the same on issues like abortion. And in the old days when we had equal rights on the ballot, men and women voted the same. They vote differently on economics because women are more economically vulnerable. And that is why the Democrats tend to do better among women than Republicans do. And it's why married women vote more Republican than unmarried women do, because married women are economically more secure than unmarried women. And unmarried women, by the way, doesn't just mean cute young things. It also means older widows. And so you've got a whole age range of women who are feeling economically vulnerable, and they do tend to vote Democratic. So in every one of these races that we're looking at tonight, you do see the Democrat winning the women's vote. The question is whether the Democrat is winning it by enough to offset the very heavy male vote going for the Republican.
Cokie, stand by, because we've got some more results I want to get your thoughts on in just a second. But it's just after 8:30, and the polls have now closed in the state of Arkansas, which has had one of the most hotly contested and closely watched Senate races in the country this time around. And ABC News can project a winner in that race, and the winner is the Republican Tom Cotton, who's been running against Mark Pryor, the incumbent Democrat. This was a race that former President Bill Clinton took a large personal interest in, given that it's his home state. He came and campaigned several times for Mark Pryor. Clinton's old friends with the prior family. But Tom Cotton, the Democrat, emerging as the victor tonight, according to the ABC News projection. So far, we've got, I think we have to update this, but so far that would give us 2 Republican switches, although this graphic just says 1, which is Mitch McConnell's seat. But let me give you some other results from around the nation tonight. Shelley Moore Capito, the Republican, winning in West Virginia, according to the ABC News projection. Moving on now to Kentucky. As mentioned, Mitch McConnell, the incumbent Republican, defeating Allison Lundergan Grimes. Sorry about that. And by the way, this is a live shot of Mitch McConnell giving his acceptance speech. Let's just listen for a few seconds here.
People who don't share that view. Too many in Washington have forgotten that their job is to serve. So tomorrow, the papers will say, I won this race. But the truth is, tonight we begin another one that's far more important than mine. And that's the race to turn this country around. To restore hope and confidence and optimism to this Commonwealth and across this nation of ours. Some things don't change after tonight. I don't expect the president to wake up tomorrow and view the world any differently than he did when he woke up this morning. He knows I won't either. But look, we do have an obligation to work together on issues where we can agree. I think we have a duty to do that. Just because we have a two-party system doesn't mean we have to be in perpetual conflict. I think I've shown that to be true at critical times in the past. I hope the president gives me the chance to show it again. There's so much that we can and should do for the good of all Americans. Kentuckians are tired of a government that only seems to work when it is working against them. And they're also tired of hearing that those of us who fight for them in Washington are somehow the problem. I'm so honored to have Dr. Noel Hunter with me tonight.
And that's just a little taste of Mitch McConnell giving his victory speech tonight in Kentucky with his wife by his side, looking on adoringly. Let's whip through some of the other results we've got from tonight, or the other races that we're following very closely. Let's go to Georgia now, where we are still waiting for enough information to project a winner in the race between Democrat Michelle Nunn and the Republican David Perdue. Also watching a very tight race in Virginia tonight between the Democrat incumbent Mark Warner and his Republican opponent Ed Gillespie. A very, very tight race. A lot of people will be watching that very closely. Also in North Carolina, it's Kay Hagan, the Democratic incumbent, running against Tom Tillis, the Republican. ABC News does not have enough information to project a winner, but this is a biggie. And as you've heard us discussing, New Hampshire also has a big race tonight. The incumbent Jeanne Shaheen, the Democrat, up against Scott Brown, formerly a Republican senator from Massachusetts. We do not have enough information to project a winner at this point. At this point, the Republicans have gained 2 seats. They need 6 to take control of the United States Senate. That is the most prominent dynamic of this evening. And in the governor's race, as we've mentioned, there are 36 governorships up for grabs tonight. And one big one is the state of Arkansas, where the polls just closed, and we can project a winner in that one. And it will be Asa Hutchinson, the Republican, who's been running against the Democrat Mike Ross. This is another race where President Clinton, the former president, campaigned repeatedly and strenuously. By the way, Asa Hutchinson was one of the so-called House managers who brought the impeachment charges against President Clinton, so one has to imagine there was a certain amount of personal animus involved in his campaigning here, apparently to no avail. Let's go over to Nate Silver now from 538. Nate, you with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
So what's your view on Arkansas and the apparent lack of impact by the former President Bill Clinton, who campaigned there, I believe, upwards of 6 times?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a good state for Republicans in red states so far, and the Democrats' fundamental problem is that a lot of the contests this year are being held in states that vote very Republican for president now. The fact that the race was projected immediately by ABC News probably means Pryor's going to lose by a wide margin. We see McConnell now up by 12 or 13 points in Kentucky, more than polls projected. So far, Democrats were worried before the election maybe polls will be biased against them. So far, we're seeing polls might have been biased toward them. But again, in these very red states, we're less sure what's going to go on in the more purple states like North Carolina and New Hampshire.
Well, actually, we do have a projection in the purple state of New Hampshire. ABC News is projecting that the winner will be Jeanne Shaheen, the Democrat, who's been running against Scott Brown, the Republican. Jeanne Shaheen and Scott Brown running in a very tight, very heated race. This is a bit of good news for the Democrats tonight. Does it surprise you at all, Nate, given the polling leading up to this?
We had Shaheen as about an 80% favorite going in, so this is finally a piece of good news, though. You clinch an 80% state for Democrats. So what we have to find out now is what do more of these purple states look like? Georgia's a state where maybe things so far look up for David Perdue, the Republican. That would be a big call, but this is a little bit of a sigh of relief for Democrats that you did salvage one purple state at least.
Last I heard, you had the odds of 78% that the Republicans will take the Senate. Where does that stand right now?
So since we made just this Shaheen call on air, we're not quite sure. It was going to be 80% with the call against Pryor in Arkansas, so probably somewhere still in the 70-ish, 75%-ish range, I would think, since that was an expected outcome in New Hampshire.
Do you think that we will know who controls the Senate by the end of tonight, or are we going to be in a situation where it may be January before we find out?
It could be January. This is why Georgia is important to watch. One thing that we're watching in Georgia is how much of the vote is the Libertarian candidate getting, and so far it's not very much, only about 1.5 points. If that's the case, if Perdue, or none maybe, but more likely Perdue, wins by a pretty slim margin by 1.5 or 2 points, he could avoid a runoff. So that's, the state I'm probably watching the most right now. We're getting more and more votes in from Georgia is where that race might be headed.
You mentioned the Libertarian candidate. There are Libertarian and other independent or third-party candidates running in lots of hot races across the country. Some of the Libertarians there's a pizza delivery man and another one's a paralegal. How big a potential spoiler role can these third-party and independent candidates play in these races?
I think it depends on the nature of the Libertarian candidate. You have some Libertarians who are more in the kind of Rand Paul school where they're quite conservative on many issues. You have some are more kind of down the middle Gary Johnson Libertarians who might appeal to young Democratic-leaning voters as well. The candidate in North Carolina, probably one of them. I think he's probably drawing more or less evenly from both candidates there. But it is a factor. On the other hand, sometimes what happens, like in Georgia maybe tonight, is that when a race gets close, a voter might go and say, hey, I like the Libertarian Party, I want to make a protest vote, and then they make the least worst decision and say, well, I don't want to waste my vote either when the race is so close, and wind up defaulting to one of the major parties.
And which governor's races are you watching most closely tonight?
I mean, the Wisconsin governor's race is something that Democrats are hoping they can flip. Scott Walker, based on the polls, Walker was a narrow favorite heading in, but that's maybe the most interesting race in the country potentially.
Yes, with major ramifications potentially for 2016. We have a projection we can make now in the New Jersey governor's race. Not one of the most closely watched, but important nonetheless. I believe we have the information coming up. ABC News can project a winner in the New Jersey governor's race. Stand by. There it is. Sorry, New Jersey Senate race. Actually, it is supposed to be the governor's race, but we don't have it on the screen. I apologize for that. Let's get it back to Nate. Nate, you were talking about governor's races. Are there House races as well that you are looking for potential surprises in tonight?
I mean, there are 435 of these things. You'll always have a few surprises. The polling isn't always very reliable in House races. But probably looking toward the overall number, one thing we look at as a sign for the national mood is simply you add up all the votes for all House candidates around the country and which party wins that. In 2010, it was the GOP by about 7 points. In 2012, it was Democrats by a point or so. So looking to that number will be a good sign. We'll learn probably in a couple days, couple weeks, after all these votes are counted, about what the overall political climate was like and how it compared with both 2010 and 2012 as reference points.
So much to watch tonight. And I love that there is actually still some legitimate suspense in the air. Nate, stand by. I want to bring in ABC's Cokie Roberts because we do have these results out of Arkansas that are so interesting to look at. We do have a pair of Republican victories in the Senate race and in the governor's race. So interesting that former President Bill Clinton spent so much time campaigning with so much energy in Arkansas and apparently to no avail. What do you make of that, Cokie? You with us, Cokie? She may not be with us. I apologize, but we're looking at pictures of Bill Clinton here, who spent a lot of time, there he is, campaigning with Mark Pryor. One of his arguments he made for people who were tempted to vote for his Republican opponent was, don't make a 2-year protest vote against Obama for a 6-year job. In other words, don't give Tom Cotton a 6-year job for 2 years of protest. And as I said before, we do have some other results to tell you about, including in New Hampshire, where we've got a call tonight. ABC News can project that Maggie Hassan, the Democrat who's running for governor in New Hampshire, will emerge victorious in her race against Walt Haverstein. That is the New Hampshire governor's race. So a good night for the two female Democratic candidates in the state of New Hampshire, both Jean Shaheen and Maggie Hassan, both the Democrat incumbents in that state, emerging victorious. Let's see if we can get it back to Cokie Roberts. Cokie, you with us now? Oh, okay. I'm told that Cokie is not with us. Jim Avila. Jim Avila is at the White House tonight. ABC News correspondent Jim Avila. Jim, is the White House reacting as the evening goes, or are they basically putting out no response until this thing is all over?
No, we are talking with senior White House officials this evening, and they are reacting as we go along. They continue to say that it's too early, that this map, of course, the continual storyline from the White House has been, and from the president himself, that this map, this midterm election, was never the Democrats' election to win, that they point out that 80% of the Senate races that were up for grabs this time, President Obama lost in those states. So they're not surprised that this could be a tough evening for the Democrats and for President Obama. One of the things that's kind of interesting that we are hearing, and not directly from senior administration officials, is that there is some, there already is some finger pointing going on about why the president wasn't brought into some of these states. We just saw in Arkansas, that's an obvious reason why not to bring President Obama into Arkansas. President Clinton's a much more popular figure there. President Obama has trouble. Where many Democrats are having trouble understanding is states like Colorado and Iowa, where the president won big in the last election. And they're wondering why perhaps those candidates did not bring in the president to stir up the Democratic base, to bring out his supporters in some pretty urban areas like Denver, and why that didn't happen. So I think there could be some Monday morning quarterbacking about that as we go along here.
Resentment and hurt feelings inside the White House about the fact that they've been sidelined to a large extent during this cycle?
Well, I asked about hurt feelings, and a senior administration official says the president is a big boy, that he, he's a man who has a huge, large ego, like most politicians do, and that's not a real problem as far as hurt feelings, that they went into this election knowing that there was going to be trouble. What's interesting to me, too, is that the president also believes that this is not going to affect his agenda much, Dan, because the last 2 years, of course, have not been a joy for the president in any way. He didn't get much passed in Congress. They don't believe it's going to be much different the next 2 years if the Senate wins in that case. Though they don't expect there to be much problem, any more problems than they've already had. They plan on going ahead with immigration reform, and they don't believe that going ahead on immigration reform is going to stop them from compromising or stop some compromises on some smaller issues, and such as early childhood education, that they believe there's some room for compromise there with the Republicans. You might see some bills that would be passed in both houses if the Republicans win, and the president signed that. They also point out that one of the big issues, or one of the big areas where there could be some room for compromise, is in tax reform. You know, the president has said and continues to say that he is willing to reduce corporate taxes if the funds from corporate taxes, the increase in taxes, were used, at least in part, probably much of it, to build infrastructure in the country and create more jobs through building of infrastructure. So there are some areas where the president still believes that there is room for compromise. He, by the way, is watching the results in the residence itself. He's no longer in the West Wing. He's up in the family area and will be watching through the evening.
I believe he has his ABCNews.com app up on his tablet right now, or maybe even his phablet. So, good evening, Mr. President. Jim Avila, we appreciate your reporting from the White House lawn tonight. Let's get it back to George Stephanopoulos, who, by the way, is just one room over. I can almost see him over there. George, good evening.
Well, Dan, what I want to know now is whether you're going to get an email from the super secret presidential BlackBerry iPhone.
That would be unprecedented if it happened. But I promise I will trot over to you at your desk and show you if it does.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. Let's talk about New Hampshire now. We just saw that call. Jeanne Shaheen, Democrat from New Hampshire, has defeated Scott Brown. Ron Claiborne up there. And Ron, I was just talking to David Muir about what was in play there. It looked like a Republican leader, still very unpopular in the state of New Hampshire. Ron? Hey, can you hear me now, Ron? We were just talking about what we're learning now about this win for Jeanne Shaheen. And one of the things we're also seeing is that, this carpetbagger issue may have started, according to the latest exit polls, cut against Brown a little bit. I think we did not have Ron Claiborne right there, as you can see. He was talking to somebody else off the screen. But, John Carr, why don't you pick that one up?
The latest round of the exit polls shows that about, I think it was 54% say that the carpet, that he had not been in the state long enough. And this was an issue that Shaheen pretty predictably hit him with over and over again. I mean, the guy was, just in 2010, elected, from the neighboring state and then defeated in the neighboring state, and then you move over. So this was an issue. Interestingly, Hillary Clinton hit him on this when she campaigned up in New Hampshire. Although, of course, she moved to New York.
That's a tough one for Hillary Clinton. I want to go to David Plouffe because I've just gotten my first email from the White House in the last couple of hours. It's from your former colleague, Dan Pfeiffer. The Shaheen results come in. Very simple. I guess this is a sign that it's not a wave. That's what a lot of Democrats are thinking.
Right. Well, Shaheen winning, Pennsylvania, some of these other races. So I think, the Republicans are obviously going to win a lot of Senate races tonight. But I do think that this is, again, both parties are on probation. People are deeply dissatisfied. And so incumbents, what's remarkable to me is some of these governors who came in 10 during the teeth of the recession, unemployment rates down, job growth up. And what that speaks to is really what's underlying this is that people don't view the economy through statistics. And there's deep anxiety. They're very dissatisfied about their personal situation. I don't think that's going to change over the next couple of years necessarily. So I think this is going to still be the major driver of our politics is who can speak to that anxiety.
It has been for the longest period of time. I want to go back to Nate Silver right now on these results coming in on Jeanne Shaheen, because that does adjust your projection a little bit, Nate.
Yeah, we have Democrats back up to a 26% chance to win the Senate right now. This is the first real good news they've gotten of the night. The question is, does this mean it can't be a wave? Well, maybe if we were sure Mark Warner would win too, but that race is obviously still uncertain.
It's still, but Democrats really, their worst nightmare was that they would early in the night, Scott Brown wins in New Hampshire, and you just see sweeping across the country a lot of Republican wins.
Yeah, and George,
that's right. So
Nate wanted to keep going there, but I can add to this just by the coalition that Jeanne Shaheen counted on here to win. Take a look at how women broke down in this race. 59% of the women showing up in New Hampshire voting for Jeanne Shaheen over Scott Brown. The moderates, as we know, the swing state New Hampshire, a lot of Democrats are going to point to New Hampshire as an important state for 2016. 57% of the moderates going to Jeanne Shaheen. And this might be the most telling number of all, George. When asked about your view of Republican leaders in Congress, 65% had a negative view of Republican leaders in Congress. That's worse than Obama's approval rating.
That was a big one. Okay, we got a lot of big poll closings coming up at 9 o'clock, so I want to throw it back to Dan.
George, thank you. Yes, we'll be looking forward to a lot to talk about at 9 o'clock. Let's see if we can get back to Cokie Roberts now. Cokie, you with us?
Yes, I'm with you.
Cokie, let's talk about Arkansas for a second. I'm really eager to hear your thoughts on this. We just saw both the Republican who was running for governor, Asa Hutchinson, emerge victorious according to the ABC News projections, and the Republican Senate candidate there, Tom Cotton, who's been running against Mark Pryor, the incumbent Democrat, also winning according to ABC News projections. And this is a state where former President Bill Clinton campaigned repeatedly and strenuously. Can we read into that anything?
Well, I suppose so. Bill Clinton has been the most popular Democrat around, and most candidates have been dying to bring him into their state. But Arkansas, he got some pushback about not having been there enough and not being there anymore. And he said, really touchingly in a way, that he had been there to bury 2 cousins and his mother's best friend this year, and that he stays, he has a residence really as part of the library, that he stays in there. And clearly it is his home, but of course he doesn't live there anymore, and there are times when people resent that. But look, the state has become a much more Republican state, and that's certainly true. But this was a definite slap in President Clinton's face. I mean, Asa Hutchinson is not just a Republican, he's a Republican who was one of the leaders of the impeachment against President Clinton. And Mike Ross, the man he was running against, was an aide to President Clinton as a kid, and really almost like a son to him. And then, of course, Mark Pryor, the Senate candidate, is the son of David Pryor, who was in the Senate from Arkansas for a very long time and was also very, very close to the Clintons. So it's not a good moment, clearly, for President Clinton or for Hillary Clinton in Arkansas. And, you know, and that's the other thing we really want to look at as the night wears on, because Hillary Clinton was all over the country this year, campaigning for candidates day in and day out. And how that plays will be something we'll be watching both tonight and in terms of 2016.
You know, we were listening earlier to Mitch McConnell giving his victory speech, and he was talking about as if the Senate was going to fall back into Republican hands, and most specifically his hands as the potential next Senate Majority Leader. And he was talking about working with the president. Do you take him at his word there?
I think that Mitch McConnell is a very, very practical politician. And that he, you just said a few years ago, you know, that his #1 priority was to defeat Barack Obama. Now, Barack Obama was reelected. And Mitch McConnell understands that he goes with what the reality is. He was very much against the government shutdown engineered by the Tea Partiers in the House of Representatives. His quotation on that was, "You don't learn much from the second kick of the mule." So I think that he understands that for the Republicans to be seen as successful, because their numbers are worse tonight, even though they're doing well, the perception of the party is worse than the perception of the Democratic Party, and the perception of Republican leaders, of which he is one, is worse than the perception of the president.
Yes.
So he knows he needs to turn that around, and the way to turn that around, particularly going into a presidential year, is to show that you can govern.
Right, but isn't he massively cross-pressured here? Because on the one hand, he wants to show the Republicans can govern, but if they work with the president, hand him some victories, his popularity ratings may go up, and that will help whoever runs for president in his wake in his party, no?
Well, and also he's in all kinds of cross currents, because I'm expressing his view, and the view that he expressed interestingly tonight. But I think that there's a huge number of Republicans who completely disagree with that and think that their role in Washington is to stop anything, basically anything, period. And that is particularly true in the House of Representatives, but it's true among members of the Senate as well. And don't forget, a bunch of those guys are running for president. And once that happens, there's no cooperation with the leadership. So he is going to be, if he is in fact the leader, he's going to be in a very, very tough position. But he'd still prefer to be the leader than not be the leader.
Is there any chance, if the Republicans retake the Senate, that they could repeal Obamacare, which, by the way, interestingly, wasn't as dominant an issue as one might have predicted 12 months ago in this cycle?
I think that it's very, very difficult to do for a variety of reasons. One is that it's now permeated the healthcare system, so that it is now part of the healthcare fabric. But two is that there are quite a few people who actually like Obamacare a whole lot, particularly families that have young people who are not yet 26 but not yet in a job that pays health insurance, and those people can be kept on their family's insurance. In states where low-income people had not been able to afford health care, who have now been able to get in on the exchanges. So there's a lot of positive reaction among people who are actually on Obamacare. So that is a concern if anybody tried to repeal it. So I think what you'll see is some working around the edges, questions about medical device taxes, things that are very arcane. A question about Medicare Advantage programs. These are programs that you buy into instead of just regular Medicare. So those are the kinds of working around the edges that I think you might try to, the Congress will probably succeed in doing. But repealing the whole package, I think, would be very, very difficult to do.
Cokie, it's 3 minutes before 9. Polls are going to close at 9 in 14 more states, including the biggies of Colorado, Louisiana, Kansas, and South Dakota. In the remaining minutes before we toss it back to George, who may have some projections, let's talk about one state in particular, which is Colorado. Why is Colorado so closely watched tonight?
Because Colorado, we thought, had really moved into somewhat blue state territory. And a huge reason for that was the Hispanic vote, which really bailed out Michael Bennet, the Democratic senator who won 2 years ago in a very tough race in Colorado. But Mark Udall, the incumbent Democrat, who of course came in with President Obama, has been running behind for a good while now. The Republican, Cory Gardner, has waged a very good campaign and is again one of these Republican candidates who has managed to portray a very moderate stance so that he is not scaring off voters. And then Udall chose to turn this into a campaign where he thought that his best shot was to get out women voters and to get them out on issues having to do with reproductive rights. And it just doesn't seem to be working.
I mean, it's interesting because even the local newspaper in Denver, sometimes viewed by some people as perhaps a left-leaning newspaper, endorsed Cory Gardner, which was a surprise to a lot of people, and I imagine including yourself.
And certainly Mark Udall was surprised. But, you know, during one of the debates, one of the journalists referred to Udall as Mark Uterus. So it really was, there was a sense that it was over the top, even though the number of ads on the question of women's rights was not higher than other ads, but it was the whole tone of the campaign was that it was completely geared to reproductive rights and birth control, and it just rubbed a lot of people the wrong way.
In a surprise move, injecting the word uterus into the national
yes.
campaign in a way
Not
that a lot of people
something I ever thought I'd be saying.
Exactly. We're in a whole new era here, Cokie. Stand by. We're going to be talking to you much more as the evening progresses, but we're coming up at 9 o'clock. 14 states where the polls are closing. George has new information for us coming up after a very, very quick break. Keep it here.
This is an ABC News election update. Now reporting, George Stephanopoulos.
Good evening. We're taking a quick break from world news and our other programs because millions of you have been voting all across the country today, and our election team is here tracking all the results all through the night in a national campaign with so much at stake. Control of Congress right at the top of that list. And ABC News, we've just learned ABC News can project that Republicans will retain control of the House of Representatives. Of course, the grand prize tonight, the Senate. Republicans need to switch 6 seats to take control, and they already have 3, just in South Dakota, where the former Governor Mike Rounds has defeated Democrat Rick Weiland. There was a former Republican Senator Larry Presser in the race as well. He took more votes from the Democrat. In Arkansas, the incumbent Democrat Mark Pryor defeated by a freshman Republican in Congress, Tom Cotton, a veteran of the Iraq War, Harvard Law graduate. Big win there for Tom Cotton in Arkansas. And in West Virginia, Congresswoman Shelley Moore Capito will become the first Republican senator from West Virginia in more than 50 years, the first woman ever. Some good news for the Democrats tonight, holding some battleground states. Al Franken, the former comedian from Saturday Night Live, defeating businessman Mike McFadden. In Michigan, Congressman Gary Peters defeating the former Secretary of State Terry Lynn Land. President Obama's approval rating in Michigan somewhat higher than in some other states. In New Hampshire, Democrat Jean Shaheen defeating former Senator Scott Brown from Massachusetts. And one more big win for the Republicans tonight. Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader, is returning to the Senate, hoping to be the Senate Majority Leader. David, you're here with me right now. Republicans riding a wave of discontent.
Riding a wave on that approval rating. 54% disapprove of how the president's doing his job right now, George.
Okay, that has been a key number tonight. The president has been baggage for the Democrats. David, our whole team will be here all night long. We're reporting across all platforms all through the night. Primetime special right here at 10 p.m. Stay with us.
All right, George, thank you. Back now with our unprecedented special coverage. It's a 7-hour-long spree we're on here with this ABC News live webcast throughout the evening. We're combining our broadcast and digital operations throughout the evening. George Stephanopoulos will be leading the coverage most of the way, but I'll also be jumping in occasionally. And right now we have with us Matt Dowd, who's one of our senior political analysts here at ABC News. Pleasure to have you here. On the other side of the wall, there's like a wall between you guys and us guys.
But not emotionally.
No, not at all. Emotionally, there's no wall. You're very available. I like that about you. Let me ask you, is there anything tonight that has surprised you even one iota?
I think what's surprising is that the results seem to be mixed partisan-wise, but there's a very clear message in all of this. And the message is that folks are tired of the way politics is being done in Washington, D.C. And so some Democrats are winning governor's races, some Republicans are winning Senate races. And so as we look through all the results, we get mixed, but we get a clear message.
And do they hate everybody equally? Or is there anybody who can emerge here feeling, any party that can emerge here feeling that like it has a mandate of any variety?
The short answer is no. Neither party from tonight, I think, gets a mandate from this. I think it provides an opportunity and an opening for somebody to emerge in a way that sort of says, here's my positive, broad vision, and here's how I want to bring the country together, similar to what actually President Obama talked about 6 years ago. But I think neither party right now, if you look at the exit polls, both political parties, the majority of the country has an unfavorable view of both political parties, but they had to choose between the two of them, and that's where we ended up tonight.
So we end up seesawing every 2 years between Republicans walking away feeling good and Democrats walking away feeling good. And it's not necessarily every 2 years, but it's every couple of years there's a shift of some sort. Somebody gets a kick in the shins. And this is not because we love one party rather than the other, but it does result in a little bit of political and governance turmoil. It becomes a self-feeding cycle, as it were.
Well, it's funny because voters are going to the polls voting for change, and they're getting more of the same,
Correct.
Actually. And I think if you take a look at the history of the country, this has been the longest period of flux that we've ever had in our country in voting. When you've gone from one party that wins a race overwhelmingly, the next election they lose, the next election they win, the next election they lose. We haven't had this period of time. It's now gone on almost 12 years where this is going on, and it's unprecedented. I think it's at some point in time, the voters' frustration is even rising more and more, so they go and vote. Tomorrow they wake up and they say nothing's changed, and they're going to be even madder.
Right, so the politics, the people who get elected, that's in flux, but the undergirding sentiment is not in flux whatsoever.
No, it's moving in a direction that's negative for leadership.
Anything in the exit polling tonight particularly grab your attention?
I think just the idea, again, according to this idea that where the voters came in, and the only place they could vote for an independent was Kansas, and we'll see how that turns out. But I think voters are increasingly frustrated that the only choice they have is between these two. And I think that stands out for me in this poll. The choice between the two they don't like, and they're getting more and more upset they have to make that choice.
Okay, so you know where I'm going to go with this. As we head into 2016, is there an opening here for an independent presidential candidate, given all the challenges that come along with being an independent?
I think there's an opening for it. It depends on who the Democrats nominate and who the Republicans nominate. And so there's an opening for it, and it also depends on who that candidate is. It'd have to be the right candidate with the right message. There definitely is a place in the country right now to speak to the independents, but it's determined by who the Republicans nominate, who the Democrats nominate, and if independents can come up with somebody.
The right candidate with the right message and the right wallet, because it would take a lot of money
It would be
to
very
run
expensive.
without a party.
As we've seen in this race, this is the most expensive race.
This is what happens when you come on the internet. We have a fly here. Sorry about that.
This is the most expensive race per vote that we've had in American history. Per vote cost, this is the most expensive year we've ever had.
And a lot of this is because the Supreme Court made that decision in Citizens to allow a lot of money to flow into the system here. Do you think it has a pernicious effect?
I think over time it has for somebody that's worked on campaigns. I don't think it's good for campaigns because you lose track of your message. You're not able to stay disciplined. You have all these outside sources spending money. The parties get less power and less ability to enforce that discipline in it. And so I do think in the end it's a pernicious effect. I think obviously the Supreme Court has said it's a First Amendment right to spend this, so both parties are now operating in this environment. But I actually think for a candidate to emerge, it takes less money, but a better message.
And that's what it's going to be about.
And that's what it's going to be about.
So let's talk about tonight. Here we are. It's just after 9 o'clock. Do you see any path for the Democrats to retain control of the Senate?
I think at this point it would take an inside straight the rest of the night. It would take a draw and an inside straight to win it. I mean, say right now we've seen it. The Republicans have already picked up 2. They need 4. They're likely to get some seats that are basically solid seats for them. 2 more solid seats. So all they need is 2 more of the swing states out there to get. It's going to be very hard for the Democrats to keep the Senate.
The Republicans are running, as we've said several times throughout the evening, on very favorable terrain. However, that's not going to be true in 2016. So is it possible that they take the Senate tonight and then lose it in 2 years?
I think it's not only possible, it's probable. It's probable that they take the Senate tonight. It looks that way. We'll see as the night goes on. But when you look at, as you say, when you look at 2016 and it's a presidential race with a different kind of turnout and different geography of the country, it's very probable that the Republicans turn around and lose it 2 years later.
Who in this cycle was the candidate that most surprised and impressed you?
Well, to me, the interesting one, and I think we're going to be talking about him a lot, is the John Kasich, the governor of Ohio.
Yep.
He won that race overwhelmingly. Ohio's
He had a horrible opponent, though.
He had a horrible opponent, but he won it in a place that's a battleground place. You cannot get the presidency as a GOP candidate without winning Ohio. And to me, he's going to walk away from this with a huge victory in a key state. We haven't talked about him as much in a presidential race. My guess in the next 24 or 48 hours, there's going to be a lot of talk about John Kasich.
So he doesn't have a lot of name recognition at this point. Do you think he's nonetheless a potentially very strong presidential candidate, even up against the Christies and Rubios of the world?
I think he's going to move from unmentioned to top tier in the next 24 hours. He'll move from we don't even talk about him to the top 3 or 4 possible candidates.
What about the governor of Wisconsin?
Well, that's race. It looks like it's going to go we may be here all night figuring out that race. I think it still has a possibility, but I think his stock has fallen. If you barely win a race in your home state with the story that you saved the state and brought it together and helped the economy, and you barely win that race, it doesn't set him up well for 2016.
So we do have one result to talk about, which is out of the state of Illinois, where the minimum wage was on the ballot, and ABC News is projecting that that will have passed, that the minimum wage will now be raised in Illinois. And so let's bring in our chief business correspondent, Rebecca Jarvis, to talk about the minimum wage in Illinois and across the country. It's on the ballot in several states tonight.
Several states, and several of these states, Dan, are actually red states. Alaska, Arkansas, Nebraska, and North Dakota all have it on the ballot. Alaska would be raising the minimum wage to the top one in the country, $9.75. Right now, the national minimum wage is $7.25. If Alaska and Arkansas, Nebraska, and North Dakota go through, that means more than half the country has increased the minimum wage, which would be pretty dramatic, but it's not as dramatic as what President Obama has been asking for. He's looking for $10.10.
So why has that not happened on a federal level, just because the Republicans are against it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And what's very interesting in these races, in many of these races, they're leaving it up to the voters to decide. It's not a matter of the politicians putting it through. It's actually a matter of being on the ballot for voters.
From an economic perspective, when Republicans argue that this is bad for the economy to force employers to pay their employees more, does that argument carry water with the economists with whom you speak?
Well, here's the interesting thing. The Congressional Budget Office actually did a study on this earlier in the year, and it became a very political study because they looked at this and said that it could potentially cause job losses if they increase the minimum wage. But at the same time, they also looked at the fact that if people started to earn more wages, they would spend more money in the overall economy.
Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely.
And that's been a big problem in our economy since the Great Recession. People aren't spending what they used to spend. Now, of course, there's sort of the too hot, too cold. You don't want people to go out and spend so much with the minimum wage.
Right.
It's still a $30,000 a year income. It's not the kind of income that you can go out and spend thousands upon thousands of dollars on. It's still tough.
So at this point, the probability of seeing a federal raise is minimal, but we just have these laboratories of democracy across the country where it's on the ballot tonight, and we may see a local raise.
Exactly. And that will send a message, especially in these places where it looks like, at least the early polling, it looked like a lot of these red states, again, would be increasing it, that the voters themselves would show up to increase. I think that the big issue going into 2016 will be this question of income inequality, this question of who's benefiting from the policies of this country, who's not benefiting from them. And we talked earlier about the stock market. The stock market is up 77% in the last 5 years, but a lot of people aren't benefiting. Corporate America is benefiting. Number of companies are buying back stock. 54% of corporate America's profits are going back into buying the stock. Another 30% plus are going back into dividends. That leaves a very small amount for corporate America to invest in the people and the technology that's going to grow those businesses.
So you've raised a bunch of questions that would be interesting to run by Cokie Roberts. Let's bring in Cokie for a second. Cokie, this issue of income inequality, how resonant do you think it will be in 2016? And will it resonate beyond just the Democratic base?
Well, if the economy is still as tepid as it is now in 2016, I think it will. And I think it's interesting. It works. People are sometimes attracted both to the Tea Party and to Elizabeth Warren, the senator from Massachusetts who has been talking a very populist line. And I think it is this question of, you know, those guys are, it's all rigged for the rich guys is the concern. And anybody who seems to be shaking it up gets a certain amount of popularity. So it's not just the Democratic base. But it is interesting on this minimum wage in Illinois, it won overwhelmingly, but it was also true that this was a much bigger Democratic vote than we're seeing in most of the country. So on that question of that we've been asking in every state, how you feel about the parties, and we've seen both the Democrats and the Republicans not doing well. In Illinois, they did fine. 49% said they approved of the Democratic Party, 49% disapproved, but that's much better than any place else we've looked at it. So maybe the minimum wage vote got Democrats out. That's entirely possible.
But, well, that's exactly what I was going to ask you about. I mean, it's on the ballot in all these red states. We still have a lot of projections yet to make tonight. Would that be any reason for optimism among Democrats who are no doubt biting their nails at this point, that in some of these red states they might be able to eke out a victory because the minimum wage is on the ballot alongside their candidate?
Well, that would be a hope for them. There are other things there that tend to also attract more liberals than conservatives, like legalizing marijuana. Although it turns out that in all of these states, even as the Republicans are winning and the number of conservatives is high, that even when it's not on their ballots, if we're asking the question, should legalize marijuana, pretty much everybody's saying yes.
How much truth is there in all the talk of the vaunted ground game that the Democrats can bring to bear in elections? Do you think tonight is going to be a major test, and do you think it's a real thing?
Oh, it's a real thing. It's absolutely a real thing. If you've got a close race and you have been able to get 10,000 more people out and you win by 8, that obviously is a real thing. I think the place to really watch it is in North Carolina. The Obama forces felt that they did very well there in 2008. They were utterly convinced that they were going to win it again in 2012 because of their quote-unquote ground game, and they lost. So I think that now that there's a view that the Obama forces had not shared their techniques with the rest of the party, that has changed. And so other Democrats now have all of the bells and whistles in terms of getting to individual voters on their smartphones, all of that. And I think that North Carolina is the place they've really been working it. And so we don't know how that's going to turn out, but if it's a very close race, my guess, and the Democrat wins, my guess is it will be because of the ground game.
But don't the Republicans, who, as far as I know, have plenty of money themselves, have access to these same tools?
Of course, and they've gotten much, much better at it. In 2012, they kept saying, "Oh, we've caught up. We know what Obama did in 2008, and we're going to match it." And they thought they had, and they absolutely had not. And they said so afterwards. We just got rolled on it. But this year, they are quite convinced that they are right there and that they have the same get out the vote techniques. And Virginia is the place to watch for that, because that's one of the places that they put in a lot of effort, and it is, as we speak, a whole lot closer than anyone anticipated.
Let me ask you this. I asked this question of Matt Dowd. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts. Who is the most surprising and impressive, fresh, new face that you've seen this year on the campaign trail?
Well, of course, we have to wait to see who wins. But the surprising, fresh new face has been Joni Ernst, the Senate candidate, Republican candidate in Iowa, 44 years old, a veteran, been in combat zones, and waged a very good campaign, but also somewhat interesting, starting with her ad about castrating pigs. So she's been different, and she's been, in the view of a lot of Iowans, very refreshing. I heard Matt say to you that John Kasich was also somebody to talk about, and he's not new, but it is true that he has not been talked about by the great mentioner as a candidate for president. But he's an obvious pick because Ohio is Ohio, and he has done some things that are much more reaching across the aisle, which voters say they want. For instance, he did accept Medicaid coverage under Obamacare for people in his state who are now quite happy with it. He was in Congress. Those of us who have covered Congress know him quite well. He's a very ebullient, optimistic sort of person, which can be a little bit undisciplined sometimes, but is basically the kind of a candidate that people relate to and have a good time with.
It's no question that Kasich is going to be a man to watch at this point. And I was just thinking when you were talking about Joni Ernst that what a year where both hog castration and uterus have been injected so firmly into the vernacular. Cokie, thank you. Let me get it back to George Stephanopoulos. George, how's that for a segue? Take it away, man.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Dan. Thanks very much. I'm going to switch on to something else for a second, if you don't mind, because we have a lot of polls closing in this hour. I want to quickly get to our correspondents who are covering those races, starting out with Matt Gutman, who's in Kansas City tonight. And Matt, of course, this big race right there. Greg Orman, the independent, up against Pat Roberts, the incumbent Republican right there. Of course, the big mystery right there is if Orman wins, which side will he caucus with? And Roberts not running a terrific campaign, but also facing some real headwinds in that state because of the unpopularity of Sam Brownback, the governor.
That's right, and he started running that campaign extremely late. Nobody thought that Greg Orman could actually pull this off, but there has been a lot of disaffection with Pat Roberts throughout the past couple of months, a lot of it having to do with his residency. Folks saying, well, he owns a place here in Kansas, but he doesn't live here. When he comes here to stump or campaign or do whatever, he stays with friends. Greg Orman is a businessman right here just across the river in Kansas City. He has been running neck and neck, George, with Pat Roberts over the past couple of weeks. It is still very, very close. And tonight, Kansas could make history because if somehow Greg Orman can pull this off, he will become the first non-Republican senator in this very red state of Kansas since Herbert Hoover was president in 1932. And you can chalk a lot of that up to the disaffection among Republicans. You mentioned Sam Brownback, a lot of people not happy with him. And what they're doing to show that is staying home. The lowest voter turnout here in 20-some years, since 1992, in a full generation. A lot of people not happy with the way the Republicans have been running things here, and they're turning away. Now, when push comes to shove, does Greg Orman have the ground game in order to really finish this race? That is a big, big if. We do not know. Brownback really faces a very, very tough challenge from Paul Davis right now. So those races very much up in the air. We expect this to be a very late night.
And we did see the Republicans call in the cavalry to help Pat Roberts, including a legend in Kansas, former Senator Bob Dole, campaigning in the last week at 91 years old. Okay, Matt Gutman, thanks very much. Let me go to Lindsey Davis now in Colorado. Of course, the big Senate race there, Senator Mark Udall is facing Cory Gardner, Republican congressman. And this is the race that Dan was talking about, Lindsey, where some of Udall's critics called him Mark Uterus because he was spending so much time talking about women's issues. The other twist here in the state of Colorado, this is the first year that the entire state can just vote by mail.
Exactly. And what we're hearing on the streets from Coloradans, they are really happy about that. That's one thing in this election that they are pleased with, is that for the first time the state tried this kind of system where they mailed out a ballot to all 3.6 million registered voters in the state, and they were able to mail in that response. So they got them 3 weeks prior to Election Day, and by yesterday, about 80% of the people had voted. 1.6 million people had already turned in their ballots. A lot of people didn't even have to go to the polls. Now, some people said, hey, this is really convenient, but they were a little paranoid about relying on the mail system to get their ballot. And one lady that we talked to said, you know what, I put 2 stamps on just to make sure that it would get there. Another gentleman we talked to said, you know, I wasn't really able to trust it, so I actually hand delivered it. And there was actually a drive-through drop box system. Now, the thought is that this was going to increase voter turnout. So far, that seems to be the case slightly. At least in the 2010 midterm election, they had about 1.7 million voters. The expectation is that tonight they're going to have about 2 million people.
Wow, and of course, there's a close
thought
governor.
initially was that this also might sway and favor Democrats. That's not necessarily what's happening so far tonight.
Although tight governor's race there as well. Governor John Hickenlooper, the Democrat, up against Bob Beaupre.
Yeah, and the thought anyway, the general consensus is, at least from voters we talked to on the street and here in the newsroom, is that this is not necessarily going to be a referendum on President Obama in the governor case anyway, because Hickenlooper, they were showing again and again in the ads, Hickenlooper having a beer with President Obama and shooting pool with President Obama. The thought is that the Democratic incumbent governor is going to be able to eke it out and keep his job. On the flip side, the thought is that the Democratic incumbent senator, Mark Udall, is not going to necessarily be able to keep his job. And that's because largely, as you said, he's been criticized, getting the moniker of Mark Uterus, talking only about women's issues. People have said that he's the candidate in 2014 who's talked more about abortion and birth control than anyone else. In a televised ad or a televised debate last month, he mistakenly called Congressman Gardner senator. And many people thought that that was foreshadowing for what was going to potentially happen tonight. But Gardner isn't necessarily without his own flaws. He has this tricky matter with personhood, which is also on the ballot here in Colorado, which essentially says that a fertilized egg should have the same rights as a person. But we'll see how that plays out here in Colorado in just a little bit. Polls closed about 20 minutes ago.
Yeah, votes coming in right now. Let's take it back to Dan. Thank you, Lindsay.
George, thank you. It's about 9:24, and I think it's time to give us a sense of where things stand. Let's run through some of the big races for tonight and some of the switches that the Republicans have been able to engineer thus far. As we all know, they need 6 seats to retake the Senate. Thus far, they've taken 3 seats. Those are in South Dakota, Arkansas, and West Virginia. Let's run through a little bit of those races right now. There's the popular vote in West Virginia. Shelley Moore Capito, the Republican, beating her opponent there, the Democrat, and moving now to, I believe, Arkansas, where Tom Cotton has pulled off a victory, according to the ABC News projections, over the incumbent Democratic Senator Mark Pryor. A big victory for the Republicans, and this is a state where former President Bill Clinton has campaigned repeatedly and energetically over the last couple of months. And to South Dakota, which became a complex race. The former governor, Rounds, pulling off a victory tonight against the Democrat Rick Weiland, but there was also Larry Pressler, the independent in this race, who a lot of people thought could play the role of spoiler. Apparently not. All right, let's bring in Rick Klein for give us a sense of where things stand in your head right now. Is there any way that the Democrats could pull off a victory tonight in the Senate?
Yes, but they are playing defense in some uncomfortable places. Right now, Republicans are halfway home. They are 3 on their way to 6, but we have not projected races yet back in Democratic home territory, including North Carolina and very notably Virginia. This was not on anyone's radar screen, Dan, until the last couple of weeks. No one thought Mark Warner, the guy won by 30 points last time around, no one thought he'd have much of a challenge against Ed Gillespie, the former chairman of the Republican National Committee. The fact that we haven't projected a race yet, as the numbers are flowing in, suggests a long night for Democrats. That's not supposed to be the battleground. They still have a bunch of races out west that could flip. We're still talking about Iowa, Colorado, Alaska. We still have a possibility of that party flip in Louisiana. So the fact that we're still talking about these races back east suggests that it is a narrow path still for Democrats, but they haven't lost anything that people didn't expect yet.
What happened in Virginia? Why did the dynamic shift so dramatically?
A couple of things. I think the biggest one is that maybe Virginia just wasn't as democratic as we thought it was. It had flipped for Obama. It had flipped at the Senate level the last couple times. But we are seeing white voters and independent voters just absolutely sour on the incumbent, Mark Warner. So my assumption at this stage is that people didn't realize the kind of depth of opposition to Obama, how deeply it cut. People thought that Mark Warner, because he was a former governor, because he was very popular in his own right, put a lot of distance between his brand and President Obama's brand, they thought he might be immune. But if there's a national wave, we are seeing it wash over states that we assumed were pretty safe Democratic territory.
I'm just curious to know, what is the most burning question in your mind? What race are you most curious to see the outcome in?
I am all about Colorado. That's another one of those states that were just emblematic of the new Obama coalition. And the polls have shown the Republican leading. It's very hard to see how the Democrats hold the majority if they don't hold on to Colorado, also Iowa. But the thing about Colorado is that it's another state where we thought it had gone to the blue side. It had seen this influx of Latinos, of younger voters, a lot of technology workers, people coming to that state with much different sensibilities. If they don't show up, if they flip to a Republican of a different generation than the incumbent, then I think we're seeing kind of a step back in what we thought was a march toward a new America.
Stand by, because I have a million other questions for you. But Nate Silver is also here. Nate Silver from 538. Nate, when Rick talks about Colorado, do you agree with his analysis? And is this a state that fascinates you on an equal level?
For sure. I mean, Colorado is a state that Democrats say is key to their emerging majority. And you have had some votes kind of there already tonight. To us, it looks as though Cory Gardner is outperforming where he would need to be by a few points to win. But again, based on 2 counties, it looks reasonable for him so far.
So a good sign for the Republicans and that specific Republican in that state right now. What about in Georgia? What are you seeing and hearing out of that key race there tonight between David Perdue, the Republican, and Michelle Nunn, the Democrat?
So what we're doing is tracking his vote as compared to Saxby Chambliss, the former Republican senator who in 2008 got 49.8% of the vote and narrowly went to a runoff against the Democrat. We see Perdue beating that number in most counties. Georgia's been a little slow to report tonight, so he seems a pretty good bet to win. He seems an increasingly good bet to perhaps stay over 50% and have that race called tonight for the GOP. So, look, based on what we know for sure for now, it's not that bad for Democrats. They've had New Hampshire called for them. The states they lost were ones they were well behind in the polls. But if Colorado or Georgia, or less likely, but possible Virginia goes against them, then it becomes much more challenging.
Can we read much into tonight's results in terms of the ramifications for 2016, specifically in Colorado and Georgia? Some people in the Democratic Party have been hoping that maybe Georgia is trending their way demographically. And as we've discussed, same thing in Colorado. If things don't go their way tonight, does that not augur well for 2016 in the presidential?
I mean, you know, Georgia is one of the more interesting states for that reason. There was a lot of debate among polling geeks about were we getting enough African-American voters in the polls there. That population has increased over time, very important to Democrats' hope. So Georgia is one of the more interesting states. With that said, if you look at how things bounce back and forth between 2008, 2010, 2012, and now maybe this year, it's more challenging than you might think to read implications 2 years into the future.
Back to tonight and the race for control of the Senate. As we've said, the Republicans have picked up 3 seats. They need 6 to take the Senate back. What is your view about scenarios under which the Democrats could hold on to control? Is there a viable scenario out there at this point in the evening?
For sure. I mean, Iowa would probably be a key state to that. Alaska is a state where we have hours to go before we're going to have any sense for what happens there. And, you know, so far it's not been good for Democrats in red states. It might speak poorly for Mark Begich, but also pollsters have no idea how to survey that race. You've had things all over the place. It might take days or weeks to certify the vote there. So, you know, Iowa and Alaska, especially if Georgia looks like it's not their best option, if Colorado looks tough, those 2 states become very important.
Right. So the scenarios are out there, but it doesn't sound like you think they're highly likely.
Look, again, based on the states that are called so far, not states we're anticipating might be called an hour from now, Democrats still have a 25% shot of keeping the Senate. But again, if things go as it looks like they might based on both the pre-election polls and the vote so far in Colorado, that takes one avenue away for Democrats. Georgia might be another potentially.
Nate Silver, the founder and editor-in-chief of 538. Nate, thank you. Let's bring him back in, Rick Klein. If the Republicans do win tonight, if they do take back the Senate and they win big, can they view this as a mandate?
No, I don't think there's any scenario, even with a big win, where they can legitimately view this as a mandate to govern. I think it's a mandate to do what the other guys aren't doing. But we did not see Republicans, very strikingly, we did not see them coalesce around a message, around a contract with America, or even around some version of what the Democrats did in 2006. They didn't really say what they wanted to do. They said that what they didn't want to be. And if you look at the numbers, and we're seeing this throughout the exit polls tonight, Dan, you're seeing a country that just has this deep, deep anger and this deep anxiety about so many different issues, from economics to terrorism. And it's not clear that Republicans have the answers either. Their brand, just as poorly viewed, in fact, worse viewed than the Democratic brand. So they're going to have to actually govern to actually earn some kind of a mandate.
You wrote a memo today, which was, even by Rick Klein standards, particularly elegant, in which you said that voters are shifting their allegiances cycle by cycle, but they're not giving anybody, or I think the words you used were, they're not conferring their loyalty on any of these parties, on either of these parties. How significant a trend is this in American politics, and what does it mean for governance?
This has actually become the new normal, and it's gone on for much of the last decade. You've seen parties begin to define themselves by being something in opposition, and that started in 2006. I think President Obama may have broken that slightly in 2008. I think a lot of voters felt like he stood for something, but if you look at how he defined himself, it had a lot to do with what Bush wasn't and the unpopularity of Bush. And then you've seen change after change election, and people continue to be frustrated by that. Neither party has been able to break through that and say, look, this is the vision forward. And I think it has a lot of these anxieties, and the fact that we're now going a decade where people are thinking that we're on the wrong track. There's a deep pessimism in the electorate tonight that I think it belies the belief that either party could draw out of this some kind of a broad vision that the people are saying, go do something for us.
Is there an opening here for an independent candidate in 2016, given all the difficulty of running an independent campaign for president?
Yes. The only thing that's missing is a person that can do it. The room is there in the electorate. It's almost like the American people are pointing the way for someone to do this. It just takes someone that would have the kind of appeal, name recognition, I think, frankly, money to be able to do it, because it's just so difficult to break through in the two-party system we have. But everything is there for this moment in politics to empower a centrist third-party movement.
Now, let's just get back to tonight for a second. Assuming that the Republicans do take control of the Senate, what does it mean for the final 2 years of President Obama's presidency? Can he get anything done?
Well, he's going to have to decide whether he wants to recalibrate. And we've seen reporting tonight from our colleague Jonathan Karl, our chief White House correspondent, that suggests that they're not ready to do that they're looking to double down on the kind of vision.
How?
Well, recalibrate and decide to take some small victories, to decide to find some areas. Look, you could look on jobs and the economy. You could look on energy and the environment. There are things that Republicans are ready to pass that the president could decide he wants to sign, or at least do as part of a package deal. They could get something big done on the budget and on taxes, kind of a grand bargain on economics. But there's no inclination out of this White House. They're not viewing this as a mandate for the other guys. They're not viewing this as a judgment on their own agenda. They keep talking about how the playing field was stacked against them. So if they don't view it that way, I don't think there's much incentive for the president to compromise. And I think what we've seen for the last few years, which is a dysfunction, kind of a grinding of government's gears, likely to continue.
So do you think that in terms of the calculus from the perspective of the Republicans, is there any incentive on their part to work with the president to show that they can, in fact, govern? We heard noises to that effect from Mitch McConnell, not only going into tonight, but actually while he was delivering his victory speech. Or is there pressure, Cokie and I were talking about this earlier, cross-pressure, where if they work with the president, hand him any variety of victory and boost his approval ratings, this is going to make it harder for a Republican to run against the Democrat in 2016. Where does that all shake out?
Right, and I think that this is where 2016 plays into it, because you're going to have a number of United States senators who are going to be in the majority for the first time and running for president. Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, Marco Rubio. Do any of them see any space in deciding to accommodate? I don't think it's going to be Ted Cruz. Probably not Rand Paul. Maybe Marco Rubio you watch, or maybe one of the governors, including someone like John Kasich, Scott Walker, Bobby Jindal. Is there someone that sees any kind of space? Jeb Bush, as a former governor, do they see any space to try to kind of co-opt an Obama issue or two. I don't see it as likely, but if the entire race for the presidency is running to the right, someone's going to see a path toward the middle.
But where that leaves us as a country is with a Washington that's not doing anything.
That's right. And I don't think there's any realistic chance for that changing in the next 2 years. I don't think that the Republican Party is going to wake up on Wednesday, Thursday, and say, well, now's the time we're going to start working with this president who's now at the low point. If it didn't happen after 2008, if it didn't happen after 2012, there's not a lot of room there. But for the future health of the party, there's going to be a lot of energy that suggests there's got to find something to appeal to a broader swath of the public.
We're going to talk, and this is a bit of a left turn, but bear with me. We're going to talk to Lindsay Davis in Colorado in a second. And before, when she was talking to George, I was just struck by her discussion of the fact that you can vote by mail for governor in Colorado right now. So it just got me thinking, why can't we vote by mail everywhere for everyone? And better than that, why can't we just vote on our phones?
That may be the future. Every state controls its own election laws, and some states have been at the forefront of this. Oregon, Washington, they've been doing this for a while. Now Colorado moving in that direction where every voter in the state got a mail-in ballot. Makes it very hard to predict my favorite state, Colorado, today. But that may be the future. But there's a bunch of states that still have a tradition of same-day voting. You can't vote early unless you've got a really good excuse with an absentee ballot. It may get there. I think there's still security concerns around voter ID if it's internet voting or smartphone voting. Maybe we'll get there at some point with some kind of a password system. But election day has become election month. There's no question about it. A record number of people voted long before the polls opened this morning.
Yeah, and I feel like if you could vote on your phone, the abysmally low levels of voter participation we have in this country would change entirely. Don't go anywhere. I love that you can pretty much answer any question I ask. I feel like I could ask you about, the growth cycle of parsnips, and you would be able to give me several paragraphs. So stand by, because I like having somebody like you around. But let me get to Lindsay Davis in Colorado. Lindsay, you just spent some time in Denver. You've been watching the TV, I imagine. How many political ads have you seen in this state where you've got a hot Senate race and a hot governor's race?
I actually, yesterday, Dan, I was trying to count them, and at a certain point, I just lost track. There was an entire commercial break, though, that was only campaign ads. If you think that you're tired of campaign ads wherever you live, try living in Denver, where they've seen more than anywhere else in the entire country. Interestingly, half of the campaign ads that were for the Senate, they were nearly half, I should say, 47% were about abortion. Meanwhile, in the governor's race here, none of them mentioned abortion. Colorado Public Radio has said statewide that if you added them, ran them all back and forth, you'd have to spend 43 days in order to get through all these ads, Dan.
So we have some news, Lindsay, we want to take a break and talk about out of Louisiana. ABC News is now making a projection, and the projection is one that is likely to make all parties a bit uncomfortable, because we are projecting that this is going to go into a runoff. The three candidates there, Mary Landrieu, the incumbent Democratic senator, has been running against the representative, Bill Cassidy, the Republican. And then there's another candidate in the race, Mr. Manis. And this is a state where you need 50% to be declared the winner on Election Day. So we're now looking at a runoff. Let me just tell you about one other development tonight, and then I want to ask Rick about Louisiana, because, of course, that is a consequential development. But we also have the personhood amendment, which was on the personhood, I believe is an amendment on the ballot in Colorado, which would confer personhood upon the unborn, and ABC News is projecting that this will not pass. This had become something of a political football in the race for Senate there, whereas Lindsay was discussing earlier, the incumbent Democrat became known as Senator Uterus. His name is actually Mark Udall, because he was running on women's issues so aggressively, and according to the local newspaper, in an offensive manner. That's their word, not mine. But let me get back to Louisiana a second here with Rick Klein. That this is going to a runoff means that we may not know until January, potentially, who's going to be in control of the Senate.
Yeah, this is overtime scenario number one of the night, and there could be others, including Alaska, including Georgia. We've got a month now to watch what happens in Louisiana, and it is going to be a bayou brawl. It is going to be unprecedented, the amount of outside money that it's going to...
I can see the graphics already. We're going to be calling this the
we should definitely patent the term right now. All the outside money that's going to flow in there, if control of the Senate is at stake. Now, Mary Landrieu is a fighter. She's won runoffs in the state twice before, but let me tell you, she's never run in an environment like this. This state has trended toward the Republicans very consistently. Population trends that were exacerbated by Hurricane Katrina. But this is a very hard state to win in as a Democrat under the best of circumstances. This would not be the best of circumstances if this is for all the marbles.
But you really think that even though she's won runoffs twice before, her brother's the popular mayor of New Orleans, she comes from a well-known political family in that state, you really think that she cannot prevail in the runoff?
No, I think she can. I don't think it's a question of cannot. I'll tell you what Democrats thought the best chance for Mary Landrieu to survive was in the first round of voting against the split Republican Party. What was going on in Louisiana, you had 2 Republicans on the ballot because the state has a weird voting where you don't actually have primaries. So you had this Tea Party Republican with Sarah Palin's endorsement. You also had Bill Cassidy, the more mainstream establishment Republican. So the idea of splitting that up, if she got to 50%, this was the best opportunity to get it, a lot of them thought. But both sides have actually reserved advertising in Louisiana for the month of November and early December. They were anticipating this. This is actually not a surprise, but it's not good for Democratic hopes because it gives Republicans a chance to pick up that 6th seat maybe a month from now.
Right, but if the Senate control of the Senate does not hinge by the end of the night on Louisiana, they're not going to be. They're going to not fire up the chartered jets that are sitting on runways right now and all the money.
Not. In fact, that's usually with runoffs. No one cares unless everybody cares. And if control is at stake in any state, whether that's Georgia or Louisiana, or if you had a recount situation in any state or extended voting in Alaska, then all of these lawyers have the jets fueled up and are ready to go in there, and you know that the money is going to flow in. If this is just gravy, if Republicans get their 6 seats without this tonight, then I think we're not going to pay as much attention.
Let's get it to ABC News correspondent Matt Gutman, who's been covering the Louisiana race. Matt, what are you hearing about how hot and competitive this runoff will be, especially if, as we've just been discussing with Rick, the control of the United States Senate hinges on the outcome?
Couldn't be much hotter. And as you said, it's a battle in the bayou in a hot state, humid always. There's been a lot of money spent on ads already, about $35 million on Louisiana alone, to the tune of about $8 or $9 per vote. That is a tremendous amount of money. And that is probably an indication of what you and Rick said we're going to see, which is a fierce battle over that one seat. Now, this has been something that Landrieu saw coming. Everybody knew that if she didn't take it, it is going to be very hard for her, the incumbent, to be able to take Cassidy in this runoff. And there's a lot of time. I mean, you guys mentioned till January. That is a tremendous amount of time for people to build up Cassidy's ground game if it's not strong enough already, and to be able to battle her on her own turf. Voters have been disaffected with some of the things that they're seeing from Landrieu. One of the things is that, of course, she's an incumbent. She is a Washington insider, something that rankles so many people. Here in Kansas City today, just across the river, all anybody wants to talk about is how much they dislike Obama. And any affiliation with Washington, and especially Obama, serves as a big black mark on whoever is the incumbent. And she's going to have to fight that, and it's going to be weeks and weeks of uphill, vicious battles. And again, we've been talking about the tenor of these ads, and if the past few months have been any indication, the next few months are going to be absolutely brutal in terms of the negativity that we're going to see in these ads.
My friend Matt Gutman reporting from Kansas City tonight. Matt, we'll get back to you many times as the evening progresses. Of course, there is a very, very hot race in that city, in that state where you're standing right now. We'll want to find out whether Greg Orman will be able to prevail over the incumbent Pat Roberts. However, right now we want to talk about some new developments because we have some projections to make at this hour. ABC News is projecting that the Democrat Al Franken will retain his seat in Minnesota, beating the Republican Mike McFadden. We have developments as well out of New York. Not a huge surprise here, but ABC News is projecting that Andrew Cuomo, the Democrat, has prevailed over his Republican opponent, Rob Astorino. There was also a Green Party candidate in this race, apparently not much of a factor. And let's go now to a race that got a lot of attention in Texas. This is the race for governor. ABC News is projecting that Greg Abbott, the Republican, will beat Wendy Davis, the Democrat. We all remember Wendy Davis, who made a splash and entered the national consciousness by filibustering tough new anti-abortion legislation on the floor of the Texas legislature, famously wearing those sneakers. Given that she made such a splash, let me ask you, Rick Klein, why she wasn't able to transfer that over to a victory in this race. Was it just that Texas is too red for her to be able to do that, or did she run a poor campaign?
This was the great Democratic hope, but it was always going to be a reach. I think she was ill-suited for the moment, and I think there was a lot of national attention and energy that was directed her way. She became an overnight celebrity, internet star because of that filibuster, but maybe that she's just too far left for Texas right now, or maybe a decade or two down the road. She really wasn't the right person at the right time, and then I think she may have made things worse for herself when she ran a very controversial ad featuring an empty wheelchair. As you may know, Greg Abbott is a quadriplegic. He was paralyzed in his 20s in a freak running accident. And the idea of using that wheelchair, even though Mr. Abbott had used it in his own ads, I think struck a lot of voters as too much. It got her a lot of blowback, a lot of negative publicity. I have a lot of friends and people I talk to all the time in Texas who were talking up this race and even to the end saying that they had a chance here. But as we're seeing with this margin, it really wasn't close. And the fact is, she may never have won. But I think she may have done herself some damage with that ad.
Yeah, I mean, Abbott's people came out and said she's disqualified as a serious candidate for any high office.
No.
Do you think there's any chance that Texas, the reddest of the red, could ever become purple or blue?
Ever is a long time.
Well, I mean, given I know, but given the fact that we do have a growing Hispanic population.
Yeah, in fact, a lot of people talk about the possibility of this happening. It is a while, though, and I think tonight is a wake-up call for Democrats who had designs on this. There were a bunch of former Obama campaign aides who went down to Texas, were trying to flip this state. They were not able to do it, so I think it's going to be a little while before we can start talking about Texas as a battleground state.
Let me ask you about the Minnesota race. Not a huge surprise that Al Franken was able to retain his seat, but there has been a lot of ink spilled about the fact that he's not funny anymore.
Yeah.
Somebody told him you got to be unfunny and completely charisma-free in order to retain that seat. Why would somebody give him that advice, and why is it apparently working?
Al Franken won by not being Al Franken, essentially. He won by only 312 votes the first time around. There was a recount that lasted until July, 6 months into the term before he won. So he knew it was going to be a tough re-election fight. People around him said, just be a senator. Don't do any national press. Don't do any of the SNL type of impersonations. Just do your job. Represent Minnesota. Do the hard work. And in fact, he's rewarded with that tonight. It's really shocking. A lot of Republicans would have come into the cycle and said, he is target number one. Come on, Al Franken, of all people, in a year like this as opposed to 2008. But he was actually able to cruise, do something that very few first-term senators, Democratic senators, were able to do elsewhere in the country tonight.
Do you think he'll start cracking wise now?
I hope so. I think we all hope so. We'd like to see a little bit of the old Al Franken. But, he's gotten a lot of mileage out of a different brand, of being a very serious senator. And I think this is a guy that's been successful in a lot of different parts of his life. I think he thought about being a senator as a very serious endeavor. He could kind of separate the old SNL Al Franken, the old SNL writer, and Stuart Smalley and all that, and just conduct himself differently. So maybe he won't ever be interesting as a senator.
And let me give you let me get you to talk a little bit about the other result that we're just getting in, which is the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, getting a second term. Not a surprise, but he has had some very tough press, especially around this investigation that he was alleged to have squashed into corruption in Albany.
Yeah, kind of an air of cronyism around him that was exactly what he said he was sent to Albany to get rid of. And I think that hurt him, at least nationally. It didn't hurt him in the state. Obviously, he's reelected. He gets that resounding victory. He's got a book out, kind of the things that you do for 2016.
Yeah, he recommended that anybody who's quarantined under these tough new Ebola rules read his book.
Read his book. That may be the only people that are buying it from what I've seen of the sales. But I think he took a hit in terms of his 2016 prospects. If he looks to go national, he's going to have to change a lot about the way he's conducted himself, and certainly the kind of air of investigations around him would have to go away.
Does he, I mean, given that everybody thinks Hillary's going to jump in, is he really even thinking about 2016? Only on the off chance that she doesn't?
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I think there's probably not room for him in that world, but he's someone that, he's another one, similar to Al Franken, the idea of doing the job. He rarely leaves the state of New York, even though he's got a national profile as a former HUD secretary, and of course, the son of Mario Cuomo. He's got an opportunity to have a national platform that he hasn't fully availed himself of because he was so focused on establishing himself in New York.
Thank you, Rick. I don't know how we're going to do this logistically, but Alicia Menendez from our sister network Fusion is here. Are you going to just stay right there? Or are you going to come around here? I'm going to stay right there. All right, we're cozy here. We got a nice little room. They got a huge room on the other side. I'm not envious or jealous, just a little bit. Anyway, Alicia, let's talk about the top Google searches, especially in Colorado.
Yeah, I want to talk about Colorado. It's a race that we're watching, and the Google searches will tell you a lot about the contours of that race. So let's look at Mark Udall's Google search terms. His voting record, abortion. He's tried to make this election all about his opponent's record on abortion, gun control, which I think is very interesting because when you look at the Mountain West, there is a big libertarian streak there where abortion and gun control actually sort of become very similar issues because it's about the government staying out of people's business, and then net neutrality, which Udall has really championed within the Senate. And now let's take a look at the terms that have to deal with Gardner. Cory Gardner's voting record. He's a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. Cory Gardner on abortion. Again, Udall has tried to make this a major issue throughout the campaign. How old is Cory Gardner? I believe he's about 42, a young candidate. And then Cory Gardner family. There's been a lot of compare and contrast between the Udall family, which is a political family, and the Gardner family, which has much more humble beginnings. So all of the contours of the race really playing out in those terms.
Absolutely. I mean, Rick, while we're here, we're talking about the issue of guns.
Yeah.
Governor Hickenlooper has taken a beating on this issue of guns because this is a state, as Alicia mentioned, where people are pretty protective of their gun rights. And Menendez, Hickenlooper, in the wake of the shootings in Aurora, came out and said, I think we ought to cut back on gun liberty. How serious a situation is that, and could it cost him his seat?
I think it played into the idea that he was moving all over the place. That wasn't the only issue that he had shifted on, and I think it hurt his brand politically because he had done that. I think guns, as we talked about earlier, Dan, it is such a big issue, and gun control advocates are just tantalized by the facts that are out there about where the American people are on an issue like background checks. They just can't get there yet in terms of getting motivated voters out there. And I think Hickenlooper, among the losers of this year, is really high up there. He is someone that we talked about as a presidential contender at one stage, maybe had national ambitions, and I just don't see that happening regardless of what happens tonight.
There's another interesting contour to the race in Colorado, which is that the Denver Post, which is considered generally a liberal publication, actually went out and endorsed Gardner, who's the Republican candidate. And a big part of their argument was that Gardner represents a new generation of leadership, that even though they didn't necessarily agree with him on social issues, they truly felt that he was someone who would be able to get the job done in Washington. If we look at the exit polling, we're seeing a lot of voters feeling that discontent with Washington, the inability to simply get the job done. And so it'll be interesting tonight to see whether or not that message resonates.
Absolutely. And coming up in the not too distant future, ABC News is going to do a big primetime special on the election results thus far tonight, and the two of you are going to be participating. So let me send you on your way. Thank you very much.
Great
really appreciate it.
Man.
Well, hopefully we'll see you. I'm going to miss you right back. I promise you. Come back later on because we got much more to talk about. We'll see you in a little bit. Let's get it over to ABC's Cokie Roberts, who's in our Washington bureau. Cokie, let's talk about Colorado for a second. Cory Gardner, did he impress you? And do you think if he wins tonight, he's got a future that may go beyond Colorado?
Well, he's got to serve in the Senate. We'll see how that goes. I mean, you've just been having a conversation about how different Al Franken was as a senator than he was before he was a senator. So we do see that happen. Cory Gardner's already somewhat moderated his positions going into this race. He had initially backed an amendment to the state constitutions for personhood, which basically said that a fetus was a person, so it would outlaw abortion. He then changed that position, and in fact, that proposition is going down dramatically in Colorado tonight. So he has shifted somewhat, and he's done it in a way that's made it possible for him to do very well tonight. We don't know whether he's won or not, but he's certainly doing well. So we'll see how he does once he gets to the Senate. If he does have ambitions beyond Colorado, he's going to have an awful lot of competition because the Senate is filled with people who apparently get up in the morning, look in the shaving mirror, and have the seal of the presidency of the United States underneath it. So and that's particularly true this time around. But there are a lot of moments still to come here. We still have Alaska to look at, Iowa to look at, all of that. But
Colorado,
Kansas still very interesting. But you were talking earlier about this Louisiana situation, and by the way, we should clear it up. That runoff is December. It is not January. January is a Georgia runoff, if in fact there is a Georgia runoff. But I was in Louisiana. It's my home state, of course. I was there last weekend, and there were already political operatives there for the runoff, and they were going to stay through the runoff. So it is going to be hot. Now, it's true it won't be as hot as it would be if it determines control of the Senate. But it's not going to be easy no matter how you do it.
Well, given that Mary Landrieu has won 2 runoffs in the past,
Right.
do you think she's got a pretty good chance this time around, or is it somehow tougher now?
It's tougher. It's tougher because the state is really opposed to Obama, but she's in a very good position. Unfortunately for her, one of her strong points was with the business community, the fact that she's chairman of the Energy Committee. And so that's tremendously important to an oil state like Louisiana. But if Republicans take the Senate, she'll no longer be chairman. So that becomes a problem. But she is well positioned in the business community, but there's just a tremendous amount of dislike for the president, and that's really what she's dealing with.
But what about the vaunted Democratic ground game? Can't that put somebody like her over the top in Louisiana, or is that not a place where they've focused the same amount of resources that they've done with North Carolina or Colorado?
No, I mean, if they turned out every single solitary black voter, it still wouldn't be enough to overtake the number of white voters who would be on the other side. So clearly that's where she's been, is trying to get out the black vote, trying to get out the unmarried women vote, the older women vote, all of that. But it might just not add up.
Cokie, stand by. We may have one more question for you before we hit the 10 o'clock hour, but let's get to the White House lawn now. And ABC News correspondent Jim Avila, who's been monitoring White House response and reaction as this evening progresses. Jim, do you have a sense of what the president plans to do tomorrow?
Well, I think he's going to have to answer the question, what's next, what now? I think that they're prepared to do that. There's lots of talk about a news conference sometime tomorrow. And by Friday, the president is also inviting some of the leaders of both the Congress and the House and the Senate here to the White House, including Republicans and Democrats, for a meeting. So I think some of the what's next is going to start coming out very soon. We've already been speaking to senior administration officials about what they think is next, what guidance they're getting from the president, and I think what they're saying is that they don't expect huge compromises from between the Republicans and the Democrats. They say that they don't expect there to be much difference in the next 2 years than from the last 2 years. That it hasn't been easy when the Democrats have controlled the Senate, and if they lose control of the Senate in the next 2 years, it won't be any easier or any more difficult to pass legislation that the president supports. They also are telling us that there will be no change, that the president will say so, that there will be no change in his decision to, in fact, support executive action when it comes to immigration reform. He says that I'm told by a senior administration official at the time to expect compromise from the Republicans passed long ago, and when the Republicans did not get behind in the House, did not get behind the Senate immigration reform bill, that showed the president that no matter what happens, there will not be compromise from the Republicans on that issue.
And is there any area where there is potential for cooperation going forward? You hear a lot of talk about potentially on the issue of tax reform.
I think that's one of the areas, Dan. I think there is a school of thought, and there's some in the White House who believe there's some validity to it, that right now, if the Republicans were able to win the Senate, that the onus would be on them to produce something. And that there would be some effort to compromise, and that tax reform might be the place to do that, that the president might be willing to accept some cuts in corporate taxes if the proceeds from that money, if the proceeds from those would actually go to help build infrastructure in some way. So there's some ability to compromise there. There's some hope in the Democratic side and the White House side that could happen. Also, early childhood education is often mentioned as well. Some other what would be considered minor issues. But on the big picture, minimum wage, big picture of immigration reform, the White House is not holding out much hope for compromise in the next 2 years if there is, in fact, a Republican-held Senate.
bit of a grim picture going forward in terms of progress or any sort of legislative cooperation in this country in the coming months and years. Jim Avila, thank you. A lot more to discuss as this evening progresses. We've got polls closing soon in Montana and Iowa, so let's get it over to George now with the latest.
Right this second, there's a lot on the line, playing out live all across our country. And it all leads to this. Who gets power? Who controls Congress? And what will this president's last 2 years be like? Tonight, the voice of Americans will be heard, and ABC News is listening. This is Your Voice, Your Vote, anchored by George Stephanopoulos, with Diane Sawyer, David Muir, and Martha Raddatz, Jonathan Karl, Fusion's Alicia Menendez, Dan Harris, Yahoo's Katie Kerr, and America's best political news team. Now reporting live from ABC News Election Night headquarters in Times Square, George Stephanopoulos.
Good evening and welcome to Election Night 2014. Millions of you have taken charge today, telling us what you think about the state of our country, the quality of our leaders, what you want from the final 2 years of the Obama presidency. You put your rights to work with your vote. It's our privilege tonight to work through what it all means. I'm joined here in the studio by World News anchor David Muir and our election team, correspondents and experts with deep experience from both parties and reporters on the ground in the most crucial states. Every member of Congress on the ballot now, and ABC News can project that Republicans will continue to hold the House. 36 governors on the ballot, too, and tonight's grand prize, the Senate. Remember the number 6. That's how many seats Republicans need to take control from a field of 16 competitive races. And you see from that map what Democrats are up against coming into this election. They're defending 13 seats, Republicans only 3. And as we come on the air tonight with polls closed in 44 states, the GOP well on its way. Already 4 seats have switched from Democrat to Republican. Here they are. In Montana, Congressman Steve Daines has defeated Democrat Amanda Curtis. This wasn't really a race after the incumbent Democrat Senator John Walsh was forced to withdraw over a plagiarism scandal in August. In South Dakota, former Governor Mike Rounds has defeated Democrat Rick Weiland. There was an independent former Republican Senator Larry Pressler in the race as well. He took more votes from the Democrats. Republican Mike Rounds wins. In Arkansas, Democrat Mark Pryor defeated by a freshman Republican Congressman Tom Carton, also a veteran of the Iraq War, Harvard Law graduate. Big win there for the Republicans. And in West Virginia, Congresswoman Shelley Moore Capito becomes the first Republican senator from that state in more than 50 years, the first woman senator from that state ever. And David Muir, one of the things we're seeing, we have 4 switches so far for the Republicans, and what we're seeing is those Republicans ride a wave of discontent.
No question, a sour mood across this country, George. You can't underestimate some of these numbers. Let's go right to the board here. On the direction of the country, when voters were asked, is this country on the right track or the wrong track? Look at that, 65%. On the issue of trust, just 2 in 10 American voters say the government does the right thing. 78% say only sometimes or never, and look at this. President Obama, his job performance, 54% disapproving of his job performance, which is why we're seeing Democrats running away from him during this campaign, Republicans trying to run a campaign against him.
That's exactly right. Our chief White House correspondent, John Karl, here as well. The president pretty much invisible in those battleground states for the Senate.
Well, he didn't campaign there, but he was everywhere in the ads. The Republicans made this a campaign about President Obama because he goes into the election at his lowest approval rating of his presidency, and he was even more unpopular in virtually every one of the key states.
And one of the things we're seeing, our chief global affairs correspondent, Martha Raddatz, as well, Americans think tonight the economy is still their number 1 issue, but that did not dominate the campaign dialogue in the final weeks. Foreign policy ended up doing it.
It did, because foreign policy dominated, and we had Ebola, and we had ISIS, and ISIS really hit home. The threat of terrorism really hit people where they vote. So going forward, it's not going to change. The president is going to have to deal with this. Anybody who gets elected tonight is going to have to deal with it, too. And there aren't a whole lot of plans out there. There's not a whole lot of anything different, but the voters are still trending towards those Republicans.
Let's bring in our political analyst, Matthew Dowd. Matthew Dowd, you've worked in presidential campaigns. You've worked for both parties. And this is something that does happen to presidents in their 6th year. People are tired. People are impatient. People are angry.
You know, this happens to them a lot in their midterms. And President Bush faced this in the second midterm of his presidency. It looks like now we may have a president that loses in both of his midterms. He's really good at running his own election and presidential election, but the midterms have not done well. To me, this is not a big big wave so far, but he is going to face a much more adverse Congress. No matter the final results of tonight, he's going to face it in the Senate, and he's going to face it in the House.
Lisa Menendez from our sister network Fusion here as well tonight, tracking social media. What are you seeing?
Everyone taking to Facebook. In fact, in the last 24 hours alone, 16 million people have been talking about this election on Facebook. Of those, 68% women, 32% men. You could say that women are dominating the conversation on Facebook. Here's what people are talking about: taxes, marijuana, Obamacare, education, and ISIS. Big national issues dominating. And here, perhaps my favorite meme of the day, the voter selfie. People taking photos of themselves after they voted. They say that this can increase civic participation. We will see.
We will find out if it did. We have some more results coming in right now. State of Louisiana, it's going to be a runoff. Democrat Senator Mary Landrieu is going to face a runoff against Congressman Bill Cassidy, the Republican. That runoff will be on December 6th. That's because neither candidate got 50% of the vote. I got to go to Donna Brazil right here, Democratic strategist. Louisiana, your home state. Mary Landrieu has been through many runoffs before.
This is a very tough election season for Mary Landrieu. She's done it before in 1996, 2002. President Obama is not popular in Louisiana, but you know what? Mary Landrieu has staying power. I think she will do well in the runoff.
But she's definitely going into that runoff as an underdog right now. We have another result we want to talk about right now. This is a big one for Republicans. Their Republican leader, Mitch McConnell in Kentucky, defeated Allison Lundergan Grimes, the Democrat. He's coming back for a 6th term. First went to Washington 50 years ago as a Senate intern, has never lost a national race. And, of course, he is hoping not only to be the Republican leader of the Senate, but also to be the Republican majority leader right there. And John Carl, this is a man that President Obama may be forced to work with even more than he has in the past.
Very well could be the majority leader by the end of the night. And this is somebody the president has virtually no relationship with. You know, the president had developed a relationship with Speaker of the House John Boehner, but as minority leader, Mitch McConnell was somebody that almost never met one-on-one with the president. That will sure change. As a matter of fact, the president has invited all the congressional leaders down to the White House on Friday.
Bill Kristol, Republican strategist, also an ABC News contributor. Mitch McConnell, as I said, has never lost a national race. Doesn't give away too much in his demeanor, but he will be a formidable opponent for the president, adversary, if indeed he does control the Senate for the Republicans.
Yeah, and winning his own re-election where he was thought to be seriously challenged by an attractive, younger Democratic candidate. The Clintons came in for Allison Grimes several times, winning by what it looks like 13, 14, 15 points. That will give him standing, I think, among his colleagues. It's not going to be easy to manage that Republican caucus in the Senate. Assuming it's a majority, there'll be a lot of different points of view about how to conduct themselves, a lot of senators running for president. But McConnell has enhanced stature after tonight.
Okay, let's get some more results right now. This is a good one for the Democrats in New Hampshire. Jeanne Shaheen, the Democratic incumbent, has defeated former Senator Scott Brown. Of course, Scott Brown was a senator in Massachusetts, but he was trying to run in New Hampshire this time around, could not overcome Jeanne Shaheen, a Democrat with long ties to the state. And this has a lot of Democrats breathing a sigh of relief. David Plouffe, of course, used to work for President Obama, his campaign manager, senior strategist in the White House. This was the one the Democrats were looking at. If Jeanne Shaheen lost in New Hampshire, a Democratic state, this was going to be a Republican wave.
Yeah, they would have won 8, 9, 10 Senate races if that fell. So I think, and also the Democratic governor there was reelected. We saw a Republican governor lose in Pennsylvania. So I think that this is going to be a good night for the Republicans, but I think the voters are sending a message not just to one party, but to both parties. Voters are deeply frustrated about the economy and about the lack of cooperation and progress.
Two other battleground states holding for the Democrats right now. In Minnesota, Senator Al Franken, the Democrat, former comedian on Saturday Night Live, going for a 2nd term, defeats businessman Mike McFadden. Last time around, he had to go to a recount. Not this time around. He is projected tonight. And in Michigan, open seat left by Senator Carl Levin. Congressman Gary Peters, the Democrat, has defeated Terry Lynn Land, the former Secretary of State, the Republican. Did not run much of a campaign. I want to go to Nicole Wallace on that one. Now, Michigan, a strong Obama state. He's at about 50%, 50% approval there, but Republicans had put a lot of hope in Terry Lynn Land.
And Republicans, we're going to now turn to our surrogates later, but this was a place where everyone wanted to go in and prove that their message and their brand of republicanism would play well in that state, because it is the state Republicans are hungry to do well in again. To me, what's exciting at this point in the night is that we're going to be able to talk about a new batch of Republican women. And I know we're still watching and waiting for Iowa to come in, but Joni Ernst ran what Bill Kristol called the best Senate campaign in the country, and I take his word for it. We have some women that have run some key House races that I stood up and did a little hooting and hollering. Barbara Comstock is going to the House as a Republican from Virginia. So I'm excited at this point in the night.
But what you saw here in Michigan was that being a woman wasn't enough for Terry Lynn Land.
Right, but it's not the whole story, and I think there are women who have done well, and I think that when we have all the results and we look at the whole picture, there will be more Republican women in the Senate.
You brought up Joni Ernst, Iowa, one of the most crucial races right now. The polls have just closed at 10 o'clock. We don't have enough information to project it right now, but I do want to go out to Cecilia Vega, our correspondent out there on the ground right there. Joni Ernst, also a combat veteran, and boy, she really got a lot of people's attention with that ad early on where she talked about castrating a pig.
Boy, George, you're right. That ad that went viral. This is the race to watch right now. These polls, as you say, just closed. A complete wild card out here in Iowa. On one side, we have Bruce Braley, that Democratic congressman who had a number of gaffes during his campaign out here. One of them was called the political gaffe of the year, where he was overheard in what's being characterized as dissing Iowa farmers. And then Michelle Obama, First Lady, came out to campaign for him out here, mispronounced his names a number of times. Then on the other side, you've got Republican Joni Ernst, this newcomer out here, a Senate up-and-comer, as you said, an Iraq War vet. You've seen her in these campaign ads riding that Harley. She talks about packing a gun. And the ad that went viral, more than 600,000 views today, I just checked it out, where she talks about wanting to go to Washington. She mentions growing up on an Iowa farm, castrating hogs, and she says she will do the same thing in Washington to make Washington squeal. All eyes on this race right here. I do want to tell you, George, we just got some new numbers in that talk about Joni Ernst and some early polling that was done, and she seems to be doing very well among rural voters. That's what this is going to come down to out here. You mentioned men versus women, women versus men. It's been a really interesting race to watch. I've been talking with voters. She is polling really well among men, and so this is, we're going to wait until we've got a couple of, hopefully these numbers will start to come in soon, and we're watching out here,
That is definitely what we're watching. And just to underscore how crucial this state is, the Democratic leader Harry Reid has said he will not be the leader of the Senate if the Republicans win that state of Iowa. Another surprise tonight right now, we want to go to the state of Virginia right now, where the incumbent Democrat Mark Warner is facing the former Republican Party chair Ed Gillespie. Warner looked like he was in pretty comfortable shape in the closing weeks of this campaign, but Gillespie came on hard, and this one, John Carl, has really unnerved Democrats. They didn't think it was going to be this close at the end.
It really has. Mark Warner won independents the last time he ran by 38 points. Right now, he is losing by 1 point with independents. This is a state that, you know, Obama won twice. Nobody really had it on the radar screen. I wonder if an ad that ran on Monday Night Football this past Monday might have had a factor here. You know, the Redskins, the whole issue of whether or not the Redskins should change their name. Ed Gillespie ran an ad suggesting that his opponent, Mark Warner, was not doing enough to protect the Redskins' name.
We are watching that one very closely, and of course, if that one fell from Democrat to Republican, that throws off the map. All but guarantees Republicans can take the Senate. I do want to go to Nate Silver right now. You might remember his name. Nate Silver made his name back in the 2012 campaign forecaster for 538.com when he nailed the 2012 election, getting every single state right. You were forecasting the re-election results coming into tonight as well. Had the Republicans at about 76%, I believe, chance of taking control of the Senate. Where does it stand right? I take that back. 74% taking control. Where does it stand right now?
So based on states that have been called so far, Democrats look okay. The problem is that they have a lot of shoes that could drop on them at any moment. Cory Gardner, the Republican in Colorado, is ahead so far. It's counted a fair amount of its vote. Pat Roberts is ahead in Kansas. The very close race in Virginia. The very close race in North Carolina. So our model's conservative on election night. We're waiting for you guys to make a call. But personally, I think the odds of the GOP winning the Senate are considerably higher than 75%.
And of course there have been 4 switches so far. Republicans 4, the 6 they need right now. David Plouffe, I want to go to you on this state of Virginia. That is a surprise. There's a state that you all worked very hard for President Obama. President Obama took it twice.
It's a big surprise. I think what you see is, I think because it wasn't believed to be a very close race, Democratic turnout, my understanding, is our biggest problem right now. And Gillespie's actually doing pretty well in some of the exurban parts of Virginia that President Obama did well in twice. So I think it's a big surprise. Based on the vote that's out, I think Warner probably survives, but it's going to be very, very close. And I think Democratic turnout is a real story there. You look just to the south in North Carolina, which is very close. Kay Hagan, who was in a very close race, I think is going to hit her turnout goals.
North Carolina, that's a state we're going to be looking at as we come back. We're also going to look ahead to Colorado. That's a key state where the polls have just closed. A lot more coming up. We'll be right back with more of Election 2014 after this.
watching live coverage of Election Night 2014 on ABC. This is your voice, your vote. Election Night 2014. Reporting live from ABC News Election Night headquarters in Times Square. Once again, George Stephanopoulos.
And I'm back here with our entire election team. We are tracking all the results coming in tonight. Control of Congress at stake, the Senate as well, 36 governors. And ABC News has said we have already projected that the Republicans will control the House, plus 4 seats in the House for Republicans so far in the House. The big issue, of course, the Senate, and that's the map you see right there. There have been 4 switches so far from Democrat to Republican in the Senate. That's 4 of the 6 switches Republicans need to take control of the Senate. One of the big states coming up, polls have just closed in the state of Colorado. I want to go there right now. That's where Senator Mark Udall, the Democrat, is facing Congressman Cokie Roberts. Been a hard-fought race all through this election, a state that President Obama won in 2012, won in 2008. I want to go right out to Lindsey Davis right now in Colorado, in Denver, and a lot of votes coming in. This was a state also where everyone in the state can vote by mail.
That's exactly right. This is one of the most watched, most competitive, most expensive Senate races in the country. Prior to today, the headline was that this was going to be down to the wire, that this was going to be neck and neck, a photo finish. But it sounds like, based on what we're hearing, the general consensus from voters on the street and also here in the newsroom, that this is going to go to Cokie Roberts. At least that's what people are saying. And the problem, they're saying that Mark Udall presented himself as a one-issue candidate, that he focused way too much on women's issues, so much that they gave him the moniker Mark Uterus.
Let's thank you, Liz. I want to bring in David Muir on that because he's been looking at the exit polls on that. What does it show?
Yeah, campaigning on contraception, birth control, and take a look at the way the women in Colorado are voting. 52% for Udall, 43% to Gardner. That might look impressive for Udall, but keep in mind, he won women by 15 points the last time around. And look at the independent vote in Colorado tonight. We know nearly 4 in 10 Colorado voters are independents, and look, they are swinging Cokie Gardner's way, which could explain the numbers we're seeing here tonight out of Colorado.
That's right. And one of the things we saw in Nicole Wallace, this was a case where Cokie Gardner came in, replaced a more conservative Tea Party candidate and ran a very optimistic, sunny campaign that worked for him.
It did, and he did something really smart. In the last 3 cycles, Republicans have allowed the issue of abortion rights to get tangled up with access to contraception. I think the numbers are about 90% of American women have used birth control at some point in their life. So by being perceived as being against access to birth control, Republicans were really struggling with women. Cokie Gardner was very smart. He proposed putting, or at least studying, putting birth control pills over the counter. And I think that if the night goes his way, it may be an important lesson to take to national Republicans.
That is going to be the lesson, Donna Brazil. A lot of people think the Democrats overplayed this war on women.
No, I don't think they overplayed it. Maybe that was the only focus that people thought that Mark Udall had. Mr. Gardner changed his position on the personhood amendment. Mark Udall tried to make that an issue. Unfortunately, voters wanted to talk about equal pay. They wanted to talk about the economy. They wanted to talk about other issues. But the only thing they thought they heard was Mark Udall talking about one issue, and that was abortion.
Matthew Dowd.
The interesting thing to me is I think we had a lot of candidates talking past where the voters were. If you look in the exit polls, they wanted to talk about the economy. They're upset about the economy. They don't think their financial situation has improved for the last 10 years and is going to improve. And we had one side talking about the war on women and the women's issues, and the other side talking about President Obama and Obamacare. And what was left for fertile ground, which some candidates did well, was the economy, and they didn't talk about it.
One of the big races were Republicans on defense tonight, the state of Kansas. Senator Pat Roberts there facing a stiff challenge from an independent, Greg Orman. The Democrat dropped out of the race. This has been a close, hard-fought race. Matt Gutman following it in Kansas City.
And it could be an historic race tonight as well, George. Greg Orman is probably neck and neck right now with Pat Roberts. A lot of disaffection with him. And if he does pull it out, and listen, he's an independent, not a Democrat, but if he does pull it out, it would be the first time that a non-Republican is elected as senator here in Kansas since 1932. So much dissatisfaction with Republican leadership here, and they're showing it with their feet. The lowest voter Republican turnout since 1992, George.
And John Carl, quickly, one of the things about Orman is that he's had a very sort of complicated narrative on what he's going to do, who he's going to caucus with if he gets the win and comes to Washington.
Yeah, and I talked to his people about this today. The bottom line is If the Republicans have the majority, he says that he would likely caucus with the Republicans. And if the Democrats have the majority, he would likely caucus with the Republicans. What he hasn't said, George, is what he would do. I mean, for the Democrats, what he has said, what he has not said is what he would do if he would be the tie-breaking vote.
And we'll see if that's the case. I do want to go to Katie Couric right now. Katie Couric from Yahoo doing something different this election night. I know you're down in Washington, Katie. I think you're in a bar.
Yeah, George, you know, we decided to start a third political party. We're here at the Capitol Lounge in D.C. We've assembled a group of pundits, journalists, and partisans of all stripes, our Yahoo News team, to look at the results and what it means for Congress, the president in 2016. We're particularly looking at some key voting blocks both parties have been trying to woo, namely black voters, Hispanics, women, and millennials. Let's take a look, by the way, at that last group. Young voters between the ages of 18 and 29. Barack Obama was like political Red Bull to them in 2008 and 2012, and they were so energized. They came out, as you know, George, in big numbers. But now, traditionally, midterms, of course, have lower turnouts, and that includes millennials. But this time around, all indications were it might be even worse. We wanted to find out why and determine what is motivating them. Well, they care about issues like racial profiling in the wake of Ferguson, sexual assault on college campuses. They care about student loan debt, now topping $1 trillion. These are some of the things they wanted to talk about, but not exactly what they were hearing the candidates talk about. So they seem as disillusioned with government and our leaders as everyone else, and that might be helping the Republicans tonight. Of those millennials who said they would definitely vote, 51% say they'd prefer Republican-controlled Congress. So this might be the first time in decades that Republicans can start to make inroads in convincing young voters they're in better hands with the GOP. You can bet that will be part of their strategy as we head toward 2016. And George, you might think about bagging your set and doing your election coverage from a bar. I have to say, it's a lot more fun.
I'm sure that's true. No drinks here tonight, but thank you for the cupcakes. Thank you for sending those cupcakes earlier. You know, right now we have another win to project for the Republicans. This is a governor's race, and it's a big one. Governor Scott Walker in Wisconsin has defeated Mary Burke. This was a tough race for Mary Burke, an important win for Governor Scott Walker, facing a stiff challenge, looked at as a possible presidential candidate in 2016. We're going to talk about that a lot more coming up after the break. We have to take a break right now. Talk about Scott Walker, the other Senate races, also the other potential candidates in 2016. Stay with us.
George Stephanopoulos.
And welcome back to Election 2014, here with our whole team in ABC News headquarters. And all night long, we've been telling you about Senate control. That's the big prize tonight. Republicans need to pick up 6 Senate seats to get control of the Senate, and they just picked up their 5th, and it is a big one, the state of Colorado, where Congressman Cory Gardner has defeated the incumbent Democrat, Senator Mark Udall. Cory Gardner, a congressman, got into the race after another Tea Party candidate dropped out, facing Mark Udall, who won 6 years ago, was not able to prevail this time around. Faced a lot of criticism, David Muir, for his focus on women's issues. What do the exit polls show?
This is incredible, especially when you think Colorado, Obama won twice. It's where he started with the nomination in 2008. Look at this. Job performance, 55 disapproved of the president. And here's how they voted when you break it down. They clearly went for Cory Gardner. 82% of those who disapproved of Obama voting for Cory Gardner. And look at this. The women in Colorado, that one-issue race aimed towards women. Udall picks up 52% of the vote. But the key thing to remember here, George, is he won 15%, 15 points with women the last time around. And Cory Gardner edged into that quite impressively.
So despite that focus, Cory Gardner able to cut into the women's vote. That's enough to give him the win. I want to go straight to Nate Silver, our forecaster from 538. Coming into the night, you had a 74% chance of Republicans taking control of the Senate. This win in Colorado for the Republicans really ups that.
Yeah, they're at 86% now. I think that's still a bit conservative given how many other bullets Democrats have to dodge in North Carolina, in Virginia, in Kansas. Greg Orman, the independent, is behind. Every other uncalled state, the data doesn't look very good for Democrats, so they really have to draw to not just an inside straight, but sort of 2 inside straights in a row here, it almost feels like.
86% conservative. Okay. Thank you, Nate Silver. Let me take this to Matt Dowd. Big disappointment here for Democrats. You're wearing a purple tie. This was considered a purple state, one of those that could go back and forth between Democrats and Republicans, but Democrats thought after those 2 wins by President Obama they were solidifying their control.
Well, yeah, I think the Democrats actually thought it was no longer a purple state. They thought it was like a light blue state. They thought it was a state that they were going to have a lock on in 2016. And now we show it's another one of the states that's coming out of tonight, as we see across the aisle, Virginia, this state. There's a lot of purple states still out there, a lot of bellwether states in this country that we face going forward into 2016.
And that's because David Plouffe, one of the things we have to also look at right here, of course, you're President Obama's former campaign manager and strategist, and one of the concerns of Democrats coming into tonight, the people voting in 2014, a very different electorate from those voting in 2012.
Yeah, I mean, it's like night and day, really. We're at a fascinating time in our politics where the people vote in presidential years look much different. This is a big surprise to me, though, because it's a big margin. And, you know, it might be that Gardner would have won this in a presidential year. Mark Udall ran with us in 08. We campaigned closely with him in 12. He was a great fit for the state, so it's a big surprise. I mean, Jefferson County, which is the quintessential swing county in Colorado, looks like Gardner is going to win. So I think Democrats need to spend a lot of time digging into Colorado and figure out exactly what happened here.
And Alicia Menendez, what are we seeing on social media on the Colorado race?
You know, when we talk about Twitter and Facebook, that tells us what people are talking about. When you look at Google search terms, it tells you what people are curious about. So take a look at this. This is what people were asking about these two candidates. Mark Udall's voting record, abortion, gun control, net neutrality, all big issues in this race. You take a look at Cory Gardner, his voting record in the U.S. House of Representatives, Cory Gardner on abortion, which again, Udall tried to make a big issue in this race. How old is Cory Gardner? His age had come up, and then his family, comparing the Udall family and the Gardners' more humble beginnings.
Okay, now that's the Senate. That's the story for the Senate right now. We're still waiting for more results to come in. As Nate Silver said, those close races in Virginia, North Carolina, Iowa still to come. But I want to take a look back at that governor's race we just called a few moments ago. Governor Scott Walker in Wisconsin prevailing there up against Mary Burke, the Democrat businesswoman, put up a pretty tough fight. But Nicole Wallace, I want to bring this one to you right away, because Scott Walker, this was a race that drew in a lot of outside funding. He was a candidate who was given a lot of early look for the 2016 race. They thought if he lost this, that wouldn't happen. He's right now back in contention.
And he and Chris Christie, another much talked about prospect for 2016, had a big tussle about a week ago about whether or not the national Republicans had put enough money and resources into this race. So he's a fighter. He's not afraid to fight with the national Republican establishment, which a lot of people think is a very important trait in our next nominee. And I think the fact that he pulled it out by such a decisive margin bodes very well. People will definitely be talking about him tomorrow morning while we're still caffeinating ourselves as a very viable presidential prospect.
And John Carl, you're just coming in another governor's race?
Rick Snyder in Michigan, we're projecting as a winner as well. These were the two states that President Obama campaigned in for the gubernatorial candidates for the Democrats, and now Republicans have pulled them both off. Both purple states, Republicans will be feeling very good about this tonight.
You just have to go back to the issues. You just have to go back to the massive discontent we've seen out there that points right back to President Obama and what people are thinking about. They were thinking about the economy, but the Democrats weren't really talking about the economy. I remember Bill Richardson, former governor of New Mexico, on a few weeks ago on This Week, saying they should have been talking about the economy. They should have been talking about jobs. Instead, they let the foreign policy agenda go.
That was in the Senate, but here in the governor's races, Matthew Dowd, you saw these two races, Michigan and Wisconsin, where governors were able to forestall that rejection of incumbents.
Yeah, absolutely. And having grown up there and having been born in Detroit, I think that Michigan, actually, it's a very interesting sign I think you're seeing out of Michigan. You have a Democrat carry it overwhelmingly in the Senate, a Republican winning the governor's race. I think one of the things out of tonight that I think we need to look more into is the fact that the independent voters, we had almost equal number of Democrats and Democrats and Republicans turn out, and equal about 95% of the partisans support their candidate, but independent voters tonight across the country supported Republicans by 10 points.
And that is especially...
That determined the election.
And we're going to look at that in that upcoming state of Iowa as well. We do want to go back to the Senate right now. We've been talking about the state of Virginia all night, a lot closer than people expected. You see there Mark Warner facing a very stiff challenge from the Republican, former chair of the Republican National Committee, Ed Gillespie. Right now, with the votes coming in, 92% in, it's dead even, 49 to 49. Warner up by a few thousand votes right there. Bill Kristol, I remember just a couple weeks ago on This Week, you said, watch out for Ed Gillespie. I and a few others chuckled. Turned out that he put on a much stiffer fight than anyone else expected.
He did. It was under the radar screen, and maybe the Democrats were a little complacent. But it is a swing state. It mirrors the nation perfectly. and Gillespie ran a good campaign. Warner thought he could coast on having been governor and having won easily in 2008. It turned out that I think in that state, Ed Gillespie put forward a positive conservative alternative to Obamacare. He's the only Republican Senate candidate, I think, across the nation who laid out a detailed plan. I think he ran a policy-heavy campaign. I don't know how many voters read all 32 pages of his plan, but I think they had the sense that he was a serious guy who wanted to go to Washington to enact a reform conservative agenda. He wasn't just running against Obama. He really tried to make that clear, and whether he wins or loses, and it looks like it'll be within 0.1%, I think that paid off for him.
Yeah, we'll see if it's enough. You know, but that brings up an interesting point. I think you're right. He was the only one who put out a full replacement for Obamacare. But John Carl, we would have thought a year ago that Obamacare would have been the center of so many of these campaigns. It really wasn't.
It really wasn't. If you look at the issues that ads were run on, it's still more than any other one issue. Republicans ran ads on Obamacare, but by the end of the campaign, it was virtually invisible in a lot of these races, as it was, you know, more general Obama's leadership, a lot of the foreign policy.
20,000 ads about terrorism.
Yeah.
Okay, Jeff Zeleny is covering this campaign as well. He's in Kentucky tonight, but he's watching the Virginia race very closely. What are you hearing from the campaigns about what vote is left out there? What are they expecting? Is it possible this goes to a recount?
Well, George, it's very possible it goes to a recount because the loser of the race can request it if they're within 1%, and it's almost sure to be with 1%. But a top senator, a top Democratic senator told me tonight that if Mark Warner loses, this is the key definition of a wave. So we're watching Fairfax County, just outside Washington, D.C. No one saw this coming. Republicans did not even invest money here to help. This is the surprise of the night if Ed Gillespie holds on.
Okay, thank you, Jeff Zeleny. Other races we're watching right now, Georgia's still open, where Michelle Nunn, the daughter of the former senator, is facing David Perdue, a businessman. Right now, 67% of the vote is in. Now, there's some, right now you see Perdue has a pretty healthy lead, but there's a twist here in the state of Georgia. If neither candidate gets above 50%, that there will be a runoff there as well, not just in Louisiana, which will be on December 6th, but there'll be a runoff in Georgia on January 6th. And Matthew Dowd, let me bring this back to you as well. If that happens, you could see more money pour into these states than you've probably seen in 20 other states over the rest of this campaign.
Oh, absolutely, and especially if we're at this razor's edge where it's 5 votes Republicans pick up or 6 votes Republicans pick up, the amount of money that we'll spend in the next month in Louisiana and then over Christmas, if people think they're going to pay attention to Christmas shopping and not see ads in Georgia over the course of the time, it's going to be an amazing amount of thing if that holds.
And one of the things they're really going to be fighting is voter fatigue at that point as well. And John Carl, this could also very much complicate what will get done in Congress over the lame duck session and President Obama's whole approach with this outgoing Congress.
There's a lot left undone that the Congress pushed off until after the election. Needs to be done in this lame duck session, including basic things, George, like funding the government. And how will the Republicans play on that? We even have an Attorney General vacancy coming up. The president's going to announce his nominee for Attorney General, I expect, in the coming days. The question is, will he try to push it through while he still has a Democratic-controlled Senate? They haven't rolled it out.
Okay, let's take a look at where things stand right now. We're still counting votes in a lot of states right now. We've been following the race for the Senate. You see right there, 5 states have switched from Democrat to Republican. 5 of the 6 seats that the Republicans need right now. Of course, there's a lot still out there. We're still waiting for Iowa. We're still waiting for Georgia, Louisiana, Kansas, Alaska. A lot of states still out there. We have projected the Republicans will retain control of the House, probably pick up some seats there as well. 36 governors at stake, and we've just heard that Republicans are going to hold on to the big states of Michigan and Wisconsin. Democrats have picked up the state of Pennsylvania. So there's a lot more to come here tonight, a lot of votes left to count. We're going to be back talking more about 2016. Diane Sawyer is going to be here in just a minute.
Times Square in New York City, you're watching ABC's live coverage of Election Night 2014.
I won't make my mind up till after the 2014 elections, and I'll have more clarity on after this midterm.
Not going to make a decision until later this year.
That decision hasn't been made.
I just want to kind of get through this year.
I'll make a decision after the first of the year.
Okay, so I guess we can say it's official right now. This election tonight, the starting gun of 2016. Everyone waiting until then to make their decision, to announce what they're going to do. Diane Sawyer is here to break down all of the possible candidates with us in just a second. But we want to start out first with the data streaming in right now on Facebook. Alicia Menendez has gone over to the election social square right now, and she's releasing our brand new ABC News partnership with Facebook. This is the first time Facebook has cracked the code, tracking the feelings of everyone on their social network. And Elisa, one of the things you're seeing right now is how people are feeling about these biggest names looking at the White House in 2016.
That's right, George. We've never done this before, and Facebook has never done this before. Facebook scientists, that sounds like a cool gig, have taken all of your conversations surrounding the elections, analyzed them, and have come back with the pulse of the nation. When it comes to potential 2016 presidential candidates, here's what you guys are saying. You look at someone like Chris Christie, 45% of the conversation around him is positive, 46% negative, 8% neutral. Jeb Bush, very similar numbers, 46% of the Facebook conversations positive, 50% negative, 5% neutral. Rand Paul, 60% positive, 37% negative, 4% neutral. And then Hillary Clinton, 59% of the conversation on Facebook positive, 37% negative, 3% neutral. George?
That is the Facebook sentiment. We're going to track that all through the 2015 and 2016 campaign. Diane's here as well, looking at the exit polls and what they say about these candidates as well, potential candidates.
Potential candidates, I've got a number for you. 454 days, everybody, till the Iowa caucuses. Get in training now. Are you ready? And as we know, the arc bends tonight toward the presidential election. And we wanted to know what the candidates can take away from the voters today. So let's start with what the Democrats were saying about a Democratic candidate. We're talking about the person at the center of the stage for them, Hillary Clinton, of course. The Democrats coming out of the booth said 80%, by 80%, that she would make a good president. And what were Republicans saying about Republicans? Well, that's not just a big, wide field of Republicans. It's kind of a galactically wide field coming up. But these are some of the best-known names. And again, potential candidates. Jeb Bush, 49, good president. Chris Christie, 35. And these are Republicans on Republicans. Rand Paul, 39. Rick Perry, 41.
And that's just the beginning of the field. This is just one bunched-up field right there. I got to take this to David Fluff, because you have that Hillary number right there. 80% of Democrats think she'd be a good candidate. David, it was reported, of course, as you said, you ran President Obama's campaign, ran against Hillary Clinton. But it was reported recently that you actually went to her and said, you know what? Don't play around anymore. Get in this race. It's time to run. Don't fake it. Is that true?
Well, there was a lot in that report that probably wasn't true. But I will say this. I think that it's interesting. If you look at President Clinton, 1995 was as important to him as his re-election year. For George Bush, it was 2003. President Obama took, I think, smart advantage of 2011. So, you know, I'm sure she'll have some candidates run against her, but she's in a dominant position. So she's got an ability, I think, to really get ahead of the game here and understand how you're going to win these battleground states, how you're going to frame the race. And so it would be a shame to let that time go away.
And that's one view of it. I want to go to Matthew Dowd and say the flip side that is that, you know, you see all this anger at incumbents out there. You see all this anti-establishment anger out there. Do you want to be hanging out there that long as the ultra-prohibitive frontrunner?
Well, I think that she and her folks are going to be looking at this tonight. They know they're the dominant Democrat in the field, but the problem she has is this election, along with a number of other elections that have happened, says we don't want the status quo. We don't want Washington experience. We're tired of the way it operates. And she's going to have to figure out, having been in Washington for basically 20 years or more than 20 years, how she separates from that. She also has to figure out what she does with President Obama. She was beat by President Obama in 2008. She could be beat by President Obama again in 2016 if she doesn't figure out how to thread that needle.
She also has to figure out, Diane Sawyer, and you have some numbers on this as well, what kind of an economic agenda she comes up with. If she's going to get any kind of a challenge inside the Democratic Party, it's probably going to be from the left, probably from the populist left on economic issues.
And she had a chance to refine her speech when she was out of the campaign trail. Just one note, we saw my interview with her go by there at the beginning of the summer when I did that interview. So many questions about her health. She traveled to 20 states, 20,000 miles. It was a pounding marathon out there, and there aren't the questions about her health now. But back to this economic question, because you're right. It's not just people talking about their current financial situation, but it's really the question about fairness in America. And do they believe that the economic dream can still be achieved by hard work for themselves and for their children? And so we ask a question about the nationwide economic system. And here's what people said coming out of the polls. Is it fair, or does it favor the wealthy? And you can see it's 63-33. 32 there, 2-1, saying that it favors the wealthy, and it seems to argue for the opportunity for a populist candidate.
Like Elizabeth Warren, although she said she's not going to run. I wanted to turn to the Republican side right now. Nicole Walls, of course, you're very close. Used to work for former Governor Jeb Bush as well. To the extent there's any big McGill on the Republican side, aside from Mitt Romney, who says he's not going to run, he's actually leading our polls. It's Jeb Bush everyone is waiting for, but he could end up having a similar difficulty as Hillary Clinton. Again, that name has been around for so long.
Well, Martha keeps talking about how terrorism played in this election. I think one of the interesting opportunities for Republicans, we haven't been able to do this for a couple of cycles, but is to advance a very, very clear and concise message about America's role in the world. President Obama hasn't done this to the degree that I think some people thought he would after big speeches in Egypt. He hasn't really rushed onto the world stage with the crisis in Russia. Republicans, especially someone like Jeb Bush, who has traveled the world, has a father and a brother who served as president, has an opportunity. And I have to just say about Jeb Bush, I believe his son, George P. Bush, is poised to win his first statewide office in Texas as Texas land commissioner. So it is a huge night. It is a huge night in the Jeb Bush household, not just because he, and I think Jeb was a surrogate. He did 28 events for candidates who have so far, I think, have fared pretty well. But Jeb has a great opportunity to be the Republican that sort of rushes in and seizes the opportunity to stake out a very clear role for the party and the country on the world stage, and who has used Florida as a great laboratory for his economic policy.
That's the pro argument for Jeb Bush. I'm going to go to Bill Kristol right here. He's also taken on the conservative base of the party on the issue of taxes, on the issue of immigration, on the issue of Common Core and education. Is this the year, you know, usually Republicans elect it's been the man next in line for the nomination. Is this the year that pattern breaks?
This is the year the Democrats nominate the woman next in line, the woman who lost 8 years ago, sort of the way the Republicans usually nominate the most recent second-place runner-up in the most recent primary. Incidentally, after David went to see Secretary Clinton, she did call me. I want to report here on ABC News, but I can't report on my conversation. It was truly confidential with her, and I gave her some good advice. Look, I don't think Jeb Bush is free to run, but he'll have to make a case. And look, he's going up against people like Scott Walker, elected 3 times in the last 4 years in Wisconsin, a conservative reform governor, John Kasich, a more moderate governor, re-elected by what, 15 points or something like that tonight in the state of Ohio, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, people who have been in the fight the last 6 years, either at the state level or the federal level. I think the tough thing for Jeb Bush to say to Republicans who have been so engaged in fighting back against President Obama and his agenda is, well, why should we go back 10 years? With all due respect, you were a good governor of Florida. We admire your family, but why go back 10 years to nominate you?
George, I think one thing that Americans are going to look at, they're going to think there's 330 million Americans here. Are we going to do Bush-Clinton again? I mean, I think there's a sense of, is that really going forward? Or are we going to rerun this race one more time? I think both of them are going to have to deal with that fatigue.
No question about that, David Plouffe.
But I think Matthew makes a very good point, but I do think that the electorate that's going to show up 2 years from now is fundamentally different than one you saw tonight. The Republicans are having a good night tonight. Much more diverse, much younger. And so it's going to take someone like a Jeb Bush who seems different than the Tea Party, willing to stand up to the Republican establishment. A candidate like that will get a serious look from swing voters because they're hungry for that. If you nominate someone who just, you know, checks all the extreme positions in a Republican Tea Party primary, I think that person's going to have a hard time winning a presidential election in the year 2016.
This is Jeb Bush's problem. David Plouffe endorses Jeb Bush.
And David, you've been taking a look at the age of the electorate there.
Yeah, we know the midterms are so different from the presidential election, so just take a look at the age here. 23%, 65 and older. That's the highest number, the highest percentage we've seen in a midterm dating back to 1992 with these exit polls. And look at this, 13%, 18 to 29. We know that's down from 19% during the presidential election. We know that the young people don't come out in these midterms as the numbers that we see in the presidential years, but a very different electorate at midterms than during the presidential.
We have a very big projection coming in right now. It comes from the state of Georgia. It's in the Senate race, and you've got David Perdue right there. He has defeated Michelle Nunn. Over 50% of the vote you're seeing in there right now. This is a big, big call, a big hold for the Republicans. John Carl.
The reason why this is so big is the Democrats had 2 big chances to knock off Republicans, to get seats that were held by Republicans of course, in Georgia and also in Kentucky, and both have failed and seem to fail pretty big. So right now, the only drama there is left is in the state of Kansas, where Pat Roberts is running against an independent and seems to be having a lead there. But it looks like Democrats will come up empty-handed entirely on the Senate.
Nate Silver, we only have about 30 seconds right here. What does this do to your projections?
So this is one of the races we thought would go to Republicans, and the chances are going to be probably above 90% once we update the model.
Above 90% right now. Republicans well on their way. 5 of the 6 seats they need right now. It has been a great night as voters make their voices heard across this country. The votes are still being counted. We're going to stay here all night long. Continue to follow it all. Follow us online. It's Election 2014.